Just act like you can see.
Just act like you can see.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Thursday, April 11th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. You may be wondering why we open with this random clip of, for some of you may not even know who that was. Of course, that is a member of Congress who is somehow struggling to put on eclipse glasses that children wear on a regular basis for the process of about a minute and a half as she wanders off, still unable to put them on. Totally unnecessary, not important, a small thing. It's, a point to comment on. But the reason I wanted to play it today, and I have a few things I want to say before we get started, it's just one of the things that I kind of thread together today that's not necessarily the main focal point, but it's interestingly highlighted because of the topic, is how many, I hate even calling, these people are not leaders. It's important that we use the right terminology today. Rulers, people in power that are completely incompetent, like shockingly inept at the smallest things, all the way up to the just basic deductive logic. Whether we're talking about Biden and somebody who clearly is dealing with senility, or somebody who, and you can look back at older stuff where he clearly was able to string sentences together. Excuse me. But there's a lot of them in regard to Trump as well, I would argue, in his own certain ways. He's actually pretty smart when it comes to specific manipulations and his business dealings, which, I can go off on that forever. But there's so many examples of politicians today that are saying things that are shockingly easy to prove are false, which that's not unique. That's been around for a really long time. But obviously in the context of Israel, and we're going to get into the focal point of what we're talking about, one of the main things today, which is around the humanitarian aid and ceasefire kind of stuff, but also the main crux of the point, which is that Israel is obligated, and has been since the occupation to this day, to provide humanitarian assistance, not just because it's a current ongoing occupation and war footing, but because of the idea of the right of return and the illegal displacement and the fact that they've never been allowed to come back. All things that a lot of people don't even understand. And Israel is aggressively trying to pave right over that today, even as they've had their own conversations engaging with that throughout the decades. Now suddenly, because they see an opportunity, trying to just roll right over it, using politicians like your Mark Rubios of the world, like the Bidens of the world, and the Trumps of the world, who are coming out and just stating patent lies. And we're going to show people like John Bolton coming back up, emerging from his dark hole somewhere to say whatever he's told to say, or rather, right, honestly, I don't even believe someone like Bolton needs to be pressured to say the kind of lies that he wants to use to manipulate the outcome because he's got some vested interest in overthrowing Iran or whatever he cares about more than human life. So many of them are saying things that we can prove are false. And the main point that I'm going to highlight that they're saying repeatedly right now is that whose obligation is it to send humanitarian aid into Gaza? Whose responsibility is it that they're starving? Israel's. Period. Without question, regardless of October 7th, and even after October 7th, it doesn't change the reality of the legalities. And this is what's so infuriating for people like, as somebody I would love to connect with, if you have a connection out there, someone like Francesca Albanese, who has been really standing her ground on all this and telling you, going on channel after channel and saying the obvious, that is still an occupied territory. All of these, which, by the way, we'll go over today briefly, since we've gone over them repeatedly in the past, showing you human rights groups, United Nations, and many different collections of international community standing, but also just legal documents that prove that, yes, it is still occupied. It always was. All of Palestine. To this day, it all still is. And in a particular, as it pertains to the conversation, Gaza and the West Bank, and why that then means that they have a legal obligation for a lot of things that they refuse and continue to know that they're supposed to be a meeting and refuse to do so. And again, showing the conversations where they acknowledge that over the years, I think this is so monumentally important. Now, back to the point I was making with that we're going to discuss about the rulers lying about that. It's such an important point to recognize. It's not just that they have an interest in this or they're lobbying or being bribed or whatever it is. I think that's part of it too. But it just shows you that it's about the political game that we all, whether we're talking about the again, the point that popped into my head that we'll talk about, the war dynamic and how whether it's the US government, Britain, Israel, or any of the rules-based international order, and how they, as a matter of policy, conduct war that seems to almost blithely disregard civilian life, whether we're talking about Syria or currently with Gaza or any number of examples, and yet then stand back and give you some kind of intellectual conversation about why this is what it's not, why it isn't what it looks like. And, why some things are just bound that way. And the reality ultimately comes back to that's one of the reasons why Israel is so irritated. That it's going, well, you guys didn't care about Iraq. Well, we all actually did. But the reason they're saying that is because they're not really going, neither of these are genocide. They're going, it's not fair that they got to do that and you didn't call that genocide, even though, again, a lot of people did. It just kind of shows you this interesting. One of the things I've been poking apart, kind of poking at this whole time that this October 7th forward genocide has caused is that huge foundational manipulations have started to at least weaken. It's an opportunity. And I think that's important. Now that I just wanted to say, because I think we're going to see a lot of that today, and opening with that clip, it's just, this is somebody who we're supposed to think is making decisions that affect your life. Well, in fact, they are, but is that really somebody who's making decisions? Is Nancy Pelosi truly making choices? Is Maxine Waters out there truly deciding? Now, again, I could bring in Trump and the other number of people, which we will point at today, like Graham and Rubio, that I think are childishly naive about things or just stupid or lying to you for obvious reasons. The point is those ones I always list off first, left or right, because they are some of the most ridiculous examples. I don't think we can, nobody honest is going to pretend like someone like Nancy Pelosi or Maxine Waters, maybe at one point, but today are truly making choices and understand what they're dealing with when they can barely speak properly. And it's just so frustrating. So the point is, and I was going to make a joke about the eclipse, but we're well past that now. That was the only important thing that seems to have come of this world-ending conversation, as usual. But I wanted to point out a couple of things quickly that, somebody mentioned this in the chat, the pirate channel that we're using, that we've continued to use, prepare yourself because I'm going to switch it up again. I haven't been because I've been so distracted with so many other things. And quite frankly, I still am. I'm just really trying to structure right now to get focused on, this can't the work can't stop. My point is that's one thing I put off. I'm going to switch it up again for those that have gotten comfortable watching on YouTube. Again, why are you on YouTube? I don't know. But if you have gotten comfortable on this one channel on YouTube, it's going to change again. And for those that don't know, briefly, we use pirate channels because we've been censored on YouTube so many times. 2 major accounts, one well over 100,000 subscribers, long time ago, got booted off. And we don't want to keep playing this game, so we use what we call pirate channels. On that note, if you're out there and you want to support TLAV and you've got a YouTube channel that you don't really care about, that you're not worried about getting censored, reach out to me in the subject TLAV pirate channels, and I will possibly get back to you and set this up where I can use your channel to broadcast The Last American Vagabond on YouTube. Now that could come along with the channel being deleted, and that's certainly possible. So if you don't care about that, reach out. I do need more of them, but I will start doing that again. So just people don't, suddenly think we're censored again, even though we probably are on YouTube. It's because we're going to mix it up. Think of it like pirate radio, Matrix style kind of concept. These are real things. The pirate radio concept is a classic thing that we shouldn't forget about, pushing back against an establishment that's trying to suppress things, not because of the reason they're telling you, but because of, usually politics. Now, I also want to point out that, I'm today, and this is the last thing I'm going to say. I'm going to get some of these notes out of my way. I hope you guys really know how hard it is for me to decide what I won't cover every day. Yet again, I go through this excruciatingly every single day I do a show where I'm trying to decide what to talk about. And it's so hard for me because even though I know most of you like the longer shows, it's difficult for me because I still try to get them at least short as I can, even though I'm not trying to necessarily make them short. I think it's important that we've got the deep, informed, long-form conversation. I'm not worried about taking time to open like this. It's important that we have the time to do that. But I still think it's best to try to make them shorter as we can so it's easier to share. my point in saying that is that it's difficult for me. I just want you guys to know that I'm not only just kind of like laser focused. I rarely am on one topic alone. Today, again, I've got the geoengineering thing that I will get to. It's there unless my whole computer crashes again. It's there and I will get to it. I was going to talk about it today. I just try to decide what has the most impact. And the geoengineering conversation, at least the focus I'm going to have on it, is not immediately time sensitive. And some of this stuff feels that way to me. I don't need to explain this to most of you, but I just want those that are worried about it to know that I always, every day, I take a moment, I stand back and I go, am I missing something? I mean, even then we all will, missing the forest for the trees. I put off like 4 other topics today to make this important because I felt like this was important. So I wanted that to be said so you guys don't, during COVID-19, for example, the same kind of thing I made before, people thought a lot of us were hyper-focused and we were lost on it. And clearly that turned out to still be ongoing, one of the most important things that we've ever covered. And I think that that's what these things tend to be. Every so often, and seemingly in rapid succession, there are topics that sort of like shake you free from the cycle. Right. And it's just like everybody notices and it's different. Suddenly we're not in the kind of roundabout 24-hour new thing to yell about. And then we're on to something else. There's a constant and they don't like that. The controllers, the social engineers, which we can clearly see, don't like that. Now, that is important in and of itself to interrogate, to continue to go, what is it about this topic that they don't want us to continually focus on? And I think we're all seeing it every day. Some new thing falls out of this where they go, oh my God, like even for myself with the idea of Rwanda or Bosnia or any number of other genocides where I realized more than I already knew how acutely involved Israel was with these historical events. That's important. So anyway, as I take long time to open, I think that's important to make clear. We will get to more stuff. So let's talk about today, to start, a couple of important things around the humanitarian aid, the laws that we should understand, and really just the ongoing genocide that is unquestionable. I really think that's paramount right now because this game is coming back up again to say, interestingly enough, there are metrics for genocide that haven't been met. Even though when this first started, that was the point people were making to say, it's not just about how many people were killed. It's not just about X, Y, and Z. It's about intent. It's about this. It's about, and they said, no, it's not enough people. Now, because I'm not sure why exactly, but the numbers continue to grow. But the shift coming from Israeli talking points has been back to that, interestingly, saying, but there are metrics and it hasn't happened. And the bottom line is, they're hoping that you have forgotten what the World Court produced. Or rather, what they showed you, what a lot of us have been showing, which is that they have produced clearly the most obvious intent for genocide, I think, in history. The ongoing examples from all of the politicians, from many of the IDF members, it doesn't seem to stop. And so we're going to start there with a doctor telling you what he's seeing now. Now, I actually want to go ahead and caution right now that this clip and what I'll read afterward, it's not, I mean, it's graphic in its context. It's not going to be showing much. Well, there's a couple of pictures, but it's hard to explain how upset this made me, even though I read this every day. So we're going to start with something that's pretty difficult. Just the idea of how hard it is to come to terms with the fact that this is happening and that this is the level of evil that exists in the world. So let's watch this first. This post coming from Muhammad Shihada, discussing, I believe the clip's actually from Democracy Now!, I think, because who's talking to the doctor. And it says, upon his return from Gaza, the president of the World Surgical Foundation, right? Not some fringe Palestinian, whatever you want to call it. Said, but by the way, what should it matter to you if the guy was Palestinian or was a Muslim? It shouldn't. It should be a data point you include. The point should be, is there merit to what he says? And that seems not matter to a lot of people today. And that's the two-party illusion dynamic everywhere, whether we're in the UK or anywhere else. But he says, this is the president of the World Surgical Foundation says, quote, genocide was the overwhelming impression that I got. Now, this is his opinion. That this is not something that will be used in, well, I mean, it might add to some conversation at the World Court, but this is not meeting these definitions and metrics. This is just my opinion his opinion as what I see on the ground. Take away the word genocide if you don't like the definition. I saw a great clip going around today from that famous comedian making the same point. You know, these are getting mired in the definitions of these words, which are important, obviously, monumentally so in their own right. The point is not about whether we meet this in the context of whether this is wrong. It's murder. Take away the definitions if it makes it easier for you to understand. 15,000 children, people in general. How about 45,000 plus killed? Even half, let's just say it's 10,000 if they want to debate about how many Hamas members that they've yet to prove. That's shockingly too much. And the idea that we're pretending like this is something we can debate and discuss, well, it doesn't meet this level, it's wrong. And we all know it. And I don't need to tell you guys because the world clearly sees this. Here's a doctor who will make it very, very, very clear.
Realistically, what impressed me the most was the overt genocide that I was suspecting was going on. That's what brought me there. I was involved into a telehealth network providing advice to young orthopedic surgeons providing surgery in Gaza. And when I realized, based on direct feedback, that these very misplaced pins and screws were being performed by trainees without guidance because their attending orthopedic surgeons were killed or captured and imprisoned inside of Israel, and that they were flying without instruction, that I'd make a commitment to go. When I got there, echoing what Feroz had said, genocide was the overwhelming impression that I got. There were distinct signs of genocide. First of all, the bombs are cluster bombs. We've taken small pieces of shrapnel, dozens of pieces of shrapnel out of toddlers, infants, and teenagers. The country's 50% children, if not more. Overwhelmingly, our victims were children. I would say 70 to 75% of the people that we operated on were elementary school age or younger. That the injuries were devastating. As Dr. Sidwa said, the world's best marksmen are not going to shoot a kid in the forehead twice and in the abdomen. These are midline shots directly aimed, and that doesn't happen by accident. Secondly, the bombing was concentrated at the time of evening prayers. It happened all day long, but it was distinctly, purposefully concentrated when the Muslims were gathered together in tight units, shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, praying to God while they're being bombed. And the cluster bombs are infinitely more effective when the intended target is concentrated into a smaller location. That defines genocide. The cluster bombs are illegal. The snipers aimed distinctly at children are unethical and illegal. And then, of course, the way that you dehumanize a population is to kill the humans. You deprive them of their medical schools, their clinics, their ambulances. Sure, there was a big American and worldwide justified outcry when the World Central Kitchen vans were distinctly and purposely bombed right through the center of their hoods. But prior to that, 200 ambulances were targeted by the Red Cross. In this case, it's a Red Crescent, very prominently displayed on top of an ambulance. They have very modern ambulances. There was no mistaking that they were ambulances that were bombed. 200 were destroyed along with the paramedics. Doctors were distinctly shot. An orthopedic surgeon was shot in his knee while he's operating on a patient because the soldier commanded him to leave the operating room, and he refused to abandon his patient quite ethically. He had his knee blown out across the room. He was immediately fixed by his trainees, and 2 days later, he was imprisoned by Israel for 45 days. According to him, a juice box every other day, blindfolded the entire time, dropped off at a non-road prison border to crawl for 3 kilometers until somebody rescued him. Blinded one eye because a rifle butt exploded his right eye. This is dehumanization. This is the purpose of this is to kill a population. Food delivery. When we left, there was tens of miles of incoming food trucks, 4 lanes. The entrance into Gaza and the exit road into Gaza were all lined on both shoulders of the road with tens of miles of food trucks
Remember that.
bumper to bumper to bumper trying to get into the country, of course, which is limited by the IDF or the Israeli government. Why aren't they letting the food in? If not for it to deprive the population of the substance that they need to survive. This is another definition of genocide. There's no reason why they can't let even inspected food trucks in. The product can be inspected. I'm sure it should be inspected. But this is life-sustaining materials. the hospitals, if we didn't bring our orthopedic implants, if we didn't bring our dressings, if we didn't bring medicines, they would be devoid of all of this. Another definition of genocide.
It's just so overwhelmingly obvious, right? I mean, the whole damn thing. I mean, the trucks he's talking about, remember that, because we're going to talk about it next, right? Not just one of the main points that we're going to get into today from the aid perspective is the idea that they're now trying to, exactly like we predicted. I mean, a lot of the stuff we predicted today we're going to show you is coming true in the shifting ways they use the same narratives to push the next claim. It's just like the U.S. government does. But in the aid conversation, the idea that they're now claiming that they've dumped so much aid and it's just and UNRWA just isn't taking it. It's just sitting there. Well, there's obvious, even if they are actually doing that, and I question that always, or whether what they're bringing there even is actually aid. The point is nonetheless that and we're going to get to the point that they have yet to open new crossings like they promised or as they claimed they did. And even Israeli media is going, yeah, that never even got ordered. So they're clearly manufacturing this whole thing. The point is that you dump it all in one location in a bottleneck and then continue to have the kind of restrictions and inspections that take sometimes days, plural. That's according to the truck drivers, sitting in a queue for more than one day. Think about that. Then getting turned around because of one thing you can't bring in. And then you claim because you dumped it all in that spot, even if they actually did, you understand that it's their fault it's not going through. Is that the case? I mean, even if they were actually doing it in the process they're providing as fast as they could, Israel's still the one that is holding up the process with all these arbitrary restrictions and dumping it in one bottleneck area, guaranteeing that it won't come through when it needs to be. That's, again, if they even actually did that. And I'm going to show you that their numbers are lies. So it's just so wildly obvious. And that's one of the things that makes me so upset about this is the kind of grotesque reality of not just starving people, but trying to get praise for pretending to give them aid while you're starving them. It's one of the hardest things I've had to cover. It's horrifying. And he's telling you that he's watching the trucks on both sides, not waiting on one side that's been checked and UNRWA's not taking it, but watching them in general in either direction, which again, I shouldn't need to explain because UNICEF, the World Food Program, UN, human rights groups, journalists, doctors, everywhere are all saying the same thing. And Israel's like, you're all racist. Everyone's lying. You guys can decide for yourselves. I shouldn't need to explain that any further. But if I wanted to point out before I got further, we just had an amazing interview with David Icke. And many people tend to see him as some kind of novelty, and it's so strange to me. And it's how do we not realize today how clearly people, whether or not I'm sure that plenty of things I'm sure we disagree on, but how do we not see it by now? How clearly somebody who says the wrong thing or says the thing that's not supposed to be said will get completely attacked by the corporate conversation. How they will weaponize the very truth or weaponize the accusations of anti-Semitism to shut down people who are saying things we know are true. And it's strange to me, yet even people within this conversation, even people that are seeing what Israel's doing will still regard David Icke as some kind of conspiracy theorist. I'm like, that's what they're calling you. Like, how do you not realize how that can be weaponized? Nonetheless, his conversation is really important to the larger thing we're talking about here. The foundational point about Zionism, and in fact, even further, which I believe is pronounced Sabbatianism or Sabutinism. I'm probably mispronouncing it. The reason I'm confused is because David seemed to have a little different pronunciation. I would err on the side of his for sure in regard to the two different ways I heard it pronounced when I looked it up. But the bottom line is, and this is the interview right here. You can check it out for yourself. The Zionist infiltration of Judaism, weaponized migration. Huh. I shouldn't even waste the time to get into this. So that title has changed. I don't even know how in the hell that's possible. It's supposed to be the Zionist infiltration of Judaism, weaponized I forget actually the entire title now. That's actually really crazy. It's right here. Weaponized migration and the mainstream alternative media. And that got removed, I guess. Who knows? I guess it's a glitch. Could be my fault. Anyway, the point is, I have to remember to change that, but that the infiltration of Zionism or Zionism into different religions and politics and so on, as David discusses, is the core kind of foundational practice of this foundational element of Zionism. And you can prove that this is something that pretty much led into the creation of Zionism, Herzl, and so on. And many argue that let me just do this so I can give it to you guys just in case I am mispronouncing it. Sabbateanism. I believe I'm saying it correctly, but the point is that this is what some people will argue the foundation behind all three of communism, Zionism, and Nazism. It's very interesting. Now, these aren't contentious, random, nowhere. Like, these are rooted in documentation and discussions from academics. It's really fascinating. So I recommend you watch this. But the overall point is to recognize that there's a lot of Jewish people in the world, as you can see in the image here, that are protesting and screaming for people in the world to recognize that they've always seen that. And they've recognized that Zionism is a manipulation of Judaism. It's very important. So, going forward, thank you, Muhammad Shahada, for sharing this clip. It's a horrible, horrible reality. I wanted to highlight just one point that he made in all of this. And this is just a post that he made that somebody made after he posted this information on social media. You just heard him literally say it. Here's what this point is not to forget. He says, and by the way, this is Dr. Mark Perlmutter, I believe is probably the way to pronounce that. And he's highlighting this guy that you can see. And he pointed to the same guy in the video. This emaciated fellow, who is apparently his friend, is the chief of orthopedic surgery at the hospital. When he refused to abandon his patients in the operating room, an Israeli soldier shot him, scattering his knee bones across the operating floor. So picture a hospital with an IDF member with his gun inside the hospital shooting a surgeon's knee in front of everybody. Think about the impunity with that. Or we're not talking about the idea of, I mean, okay, if they're in there, where's Hamas? The argument that you're somehow the whole thing is so obviously transparent that they're making this stuff up. And that's why every doctor you talk to, including the ones, which I'll actually play again right now, who, I forget both their names, but the ones that are both speaking up prominently right now, neither of which are Palestinian, are telling you that they've been there, and everyone they've spoken to will tell you there is no Hamas presence in these hospitals. Now, it doesn't mean it's always been that way, but the point is, from their presence forward, it's been that way. And yet they just keep destroying hospital after hospital. And you keep getting the same stories from both the victims, the patients, the journalists, the doctors, and anybody else that's been involved other than what Israel has to say. Oh, of course, when Biden and Blinken backed them up without knowing any facts. But he goes on to say his trainees then operated on him, and then the Israelis arrested him 2 days later, shipping him to an Israeli prison for what, guys? For 45 days, providing no medical care, a juice box every other day. A rifle butt smashed his right eye, which you can see. His eye is gone. It burst his eye. Before they dumped him at the border without food or water, where he had to crawl 2 miles. Remember, his knee is blown out before somebody rescued him. There's just no way to misunderstand that. Now, of course, at minimum, or I guess however you want to, whichever way you want to look at that, the point is you could argue this is just this one or these groupings of IDF members that have been involved in different situations, somehow all acting in the same horrific way. Not in the same, so the doctor or the IDF member in the hospital, the one that drove them there, obviously more than one, the ones that dropped them off. I mean, the point is, you could argue that there's just a couple of bad apples. Sure. But that would take a really special kind of willful ignorance to ignore how many other examples every moment we're seeing just like this, or how many other doctors have said the same, how many other journalists have said the same, how many every single other category have said the same, other than people in power trying to shout you down from highlighting this stuff. Now, here's Mondawais highlighting, this is from the 11th, this is from today. I resigned from World Central Kitchen because it refused to tell the truth about the Israeli genocide in Gaza. It says, for months, World Central Kitchen leadership censored material. This is despite that guy coming out and saying that they targeted his convoy, probably pressured from his own people. But as many have been pointing out, the guy has seemed very suspect, and there's plenty of reasons to doubt that he's genuine intentions. Either way, whether the truth is of his intentions, which I don't know, this is somebody who resigned and is now telling you that they knew it, he knew it, we all saw it, and they censored it. They refused to honor other staff concerns, including this person's, about their work there. They are finally taking a stand after personnel were killed, but it's too late. Saying on December 7th of last year, the person writing this, I believe it's Ramzi Telhami, says, I sent this letter to the World Central Kitchen's executive team, along with a request to discuss its points in an open conversation mediated by an ombudsman, a resource hired by the organization in the wake of last year's sexual harassment scandal. The letter called for WCK to join other regionally active NGOs in calling for a ceasefire and condemning Israel's blockade, conform its language in coverage of Gaza in the standards set by its coverage of Ukraine. Highlighting clearly that there's double standards everywhere, as we all know. And an immediate cessation of meal service in Israel. It garnered 43 signatures, 43 from other people on the team, from the World Central Kitchen, contractors, chef corps volunteers, at a time when an organization's largest Slack channel had 101 employees. So you could argue near half of the people involved are saying, we want this to stop. And they're there, guys. It says the entire World Central Kitchen executive team declined the meeting and failed to respond when the ombudsman reached out to them. So they don't care what the people think. Clear. The World Central Kitchen continued to actively serve meals in Israel until the second day of the genocide hearing in January. I think that was the only point in there. The bottom line, they clearly see it, as anybody who's honest can see it. And I believe I've got that in here. I wanted to play for you really quickly, just so you remember that this is recent. This was only a few days ago. Dr. Nick Maynard.
Every single part of the hospital has been destroyed. The whole infrastructure of the hospital has been destroyed. When I spoke to Marwan yesterday, he told me there were 107 patients still in the hospital, 60 medical staff. God only knows what has happened to them. I think we've seen some of the pictures. Surgeons I know have been executed in the last 48 hours there. Bodies have been discovered in the last 12 to 24 hours who have been handcuffed with their arms behind their back. And so there is no doubt at all that multiple healthcare workers have been executed there in the last few days.
You believe executed by whom, Doctor?
By the Israeli Defense Force.
Why would they seek to execute surgeons and medical professionals?
Well, they've been doing it since October the 7th. Over 450 healthcare workers have been killed. Friends of mine that I have worked with over the years, many have been abducted as well, and nothing has been heard of them since. So there is no doubt in my mind, and I can bear witness from this from my time at Al-Aqsa Hospital and from talking to people, that there's been direct targeting of the healthcare system in Gaza, direct targeting of hospitals, and multiple killings of healthcare workers.
Any death is tragic, but this is not, and I say again, anyone dying in any sense. So this is not, and please don't be upset by this expression, collateral damage. This is specifically targeted, you're saying, medical professionals by the IDF to be taken off and executed, is your belief?
Most certainly, that is my belief.
Have you at any time seen anything that would lead you to believe that there had been terrorists who were hiding in the hospital?
Without exception, every single one has responded to say they have never witnessed any Hamas militant in the hospitals they have worked in.
Imagine ignoring all of this. And really, the best you can do is insinuate, because you can't really just state that, because they could, and they have, or the online does, but from an Israeli official position, just insinuating that they are lying because either they're compromised or they're getting funded by the wrong person, with no evidence whatsoever. It's just overwhelming how ridiculous it is. And I'm not, those that follow this channel, the way we practice this. I don't believe anybody without due diligence. And if I can't prove it, it's a data point, right? So this at best is his opinion, right? Because we don't know what he's seen, but it's a constant. All the doctors we've spoken to have said the same thing. All of the United Nations groups, all of the human rights groups. It's just so overwhelmingly crazy to see how continually this just drags itself forward. Here is UNICEF, or rather it's going underground, posting what the spokesman for UNICEF, James Elder, continues to highlight. The scene in Khan Yunis are utter annihilation.
I don't need to explain what you are seeing right now in Khan Yunis. It's obvious. Utter annihilation. What you don't see are the memories in these broken homes. You don't see the embrace of that mother and her toddler. You can't smell the dinner that was once made by a grandmother for her family. Moving around these streets, I'm overwhelmed by loss. And then I think of Rafah and the endless talk of a large-scale military operation in Rafah, I think of this in Rafah. Rafah is a city of children. 600,000 girls and boys are there. A military offensive in Rafah? I mean, yeah, offensive is the right word. Rafah is home to some of Gaza's last remaining hospitals and shelters and markets and water systems. Rafah is Gaza's last hope. And yet in the shadow of so many brutal scenes like this all across Gaza, voices are converging to contemplate doing it all again in Rafah. Whatever voice, whatever influence we have, now is the time to use it for the children of Rafah.
If you're capable of holding all of these thoughts in your mind at the same time, I just don't see how it's possible you could ignore this unless you hate some group in this conversation, right? Unless you just hate Palestinians, or you hate Muslims, or you hate anybody involved with anybody challenging Israel's narratives, right? I mean, you could say the same in any conversation in reverse. You know, it's like people that are irrationally ignoring obvious facts. That's usually something going on there. My point is, if you can keep all this in your mind, it doesn't have to mean that there's always nuance, but you just can't pretend that what's going on is justified. It's so wildly over the top. And as many people have pointed out, which is just the worst part of this, I shouldn't say the worst, but one of the hardest to kind of accept, is that they all know that already. And all they're doing is waiting for some moment to kind of go, well, Netanyahu was bad, by the way, just like we told you, or rather predicted was going to happen. And just shuffle in the next group where they can sort of maintain power and hopes that pacifies somebody and maintains the same situation for the Palestinians, which they'll continue to scream about, and they should. The point being is, let this continue until that politically advantageous or less politically damaging moment. That's hard to really understand, how somebody in any position who has any morals, humanity, can let this continue to go forward, knowing what's happening. And even worse, pretending it's not. Even worse, pretending that it's okay. Here's what Tiberius said, which I 100% agree with. Now, for those that are, I'm not going to say it, read it, but it's FU is what he's saying for all these different points. FU to everyone who needed to wait for 35,000 Palestinians to die before they called for a ceasefire, which, by the way, does not mean Hamas wins. This is this childish game they're playing with this. It just means exactly what it sounds like: ceasing of firing, which is clearly never permanent. It's about stopping that so these Palestinian civilians can no longer be murdered and starved to death. At the very least, postpone the ongoing starvation campaign that they've been carrying out for decades. But they don't even want that. He says, FU to everyone who needed to wait for 20,000 Palestinians to die before they called for a ceasefire. FU to everyone who needed to wait for 10,000 Palestinians to die before you called for a ceasefire. FU to everyone who needed to wait for 5,000 Palestinians to die before they called for a ceasefire. FU to everyone who needed to wait for 1 before they died. FU to everyone who needed to wait for Palestinians to die before they called for a ceasefire. Palestinians are already dying before October 7th. Palestinians have been dying for 75 effing years. I get it. You know, it's difficult for those that can see this to continue. That was one of the things that I actually put off today. It's very hard for me. I mean, you guys can clearly tell that this is important to me. It should be, I think, to everybody. But clearly, I think that this is something that it's hard not to get emotional about. We all have emotions. In fact, emotion commentary, insight, your own perspectives. That's what makes news, it always comes with opinion, but it's about individuals who are able to make that clear, one, when you're giving an opinion, but of course, give you other perspectives on top of that, right? Because you can't just ignore that. So my point in saying that is that, of course, it's hard for me. This gets emotional because when you're watching the death and destruction, it's hard not to feel that matters. My point in saying it all is that I keep bumping up against these spokesmen and these screamers online. You've heard me reference all of them. And then I feel like it's hard for me not to want to take time. Maybe that's what it's all about. the incessant, like I probably closed like 4 different segments today just about these absurd things. A couple we'll talk about, like the ceasefire, where they keep lying to you about the real dynamics of that, or the aid. Those are obviously part of it. But just unbelievable amounts of these topics where they're just 4 or 5 times a day. Elon Levy's like that out there just constantly saying what we all know is false. And some people get swayed by it. But it just infuriates me, which I'm sure they all tried to do, not for anybody out there like us trying to point out the truth. And it's just, we got to make a note to not, it's not important. It is when it comes to a larger point, but if they're just constantly highlighting, it's not occupied, or here's why Israel was always theirs, or whatever the nonsensical point, the points they keep screaming about, I have to kind of make sure we're refocusing on the factual, important, and developing dynamics of the situation, and not just rehashing the things they keep highlighting. That's I think that's part of the game. I think that's what we need to realize, is that this is what it's really about, guys. And that's what one of the main points we're going to get into today in regard, I was highlighting the 75 years that they've been dealing with. And again, the point right now we're making in general with this segment opening on this is about the genocide. The obvious, or again, if you don't like that, or you think the definition hasn't been met, despite the World Court clearly arguing it has merit, which is still ongoing, right? There's other arguments being spun into this now as if they've already claimed that it doesn't have enough evidence, which is the exact opposite. They found it had merit, and they're continuing to investigate. To anyone to argue that they've argued it doesn't have enough evidence is just a way to manipulate what is happening, which is they're continuing to investigate because they put out a preliminary statement. So you could say that means at this very moment they haven't found enough, only saying, that's like saying, I started an investigation today, and then saying that right now means they don't have enough evidence. Well, I guess arguably that's true, but that's not what we're saying, is it? We're continuing to investigate. When they produce their full investigation, will then be able to argue whether or not they found enough evidence. This is just the same thing. It's like we're going to point out today in regard to Austin, saying that the same point, that they've yet to see any evidence, which, by the way, the U.S. lies about damn near everything, it seems, but then having all of these Israeli counterparts coming out and framing what he said, putting a quote and saying, the U.S. says there's no evidence, which they say anyway, but that's not even what he actually said right there. It's a game of propaganda. It's incessant. We should realize, in regard to the ongoing genocide, or rather death, murder, ethnic cleansing, that Israel has killed more civilians in 6 months than ISIS, the war on terror, has killed in 11 years. Thank you to Terrence Daniels for pointing this out. Easy to look up. Now, what's hilarious and disgusting about that is that they waged an entire war on terror, which we should now know was not even aimed at these people. In fact, these people are armed and funded and supported by Israel and the United States. That shocks you, then you need to start paying attention. The point is that killed millions of people around the world. That started some of the most destructive wars we know of. And Israel's killed more than that entire group in 6 months? Yes. Talk about some perspective, huh? Well, Netanyahu, on top of all of that, has now apparently set a date for the Rafah offensive that you just heard UNICEF talking about. Oh, but guess what, though? They don't tell you what that date is. Of course not. So an entire article written about how Benjamin Netanyahu says he has set a date, but we're not going to tell you. This is just a game, guys. It's it's insulting because of how serious it is, and the way that they're playing this is as if it's blasé. Doesn't really matter. You're setting a date for the ongoing genocide, to do the thing that the world has acknowledged is a massive red line. But you know what? Killing tens of thousands of people should be a red line, clearly. But I see this coming. Now, in regard to the genocidal point, and this is a very minor, in fact, aspect of the intent. It is wildly minor in regard to how much we actually have. And I don't need to show you all. Amalek and the statements, they're all enemies, even the children. 3 Israeli politicians have said even the children are guilty. Think about how crazy that is. This is Censored Man highlighting these houses of Palestinians getting graffitied with Stars of David, written in Hebrew. Now, of course, just like any other situation, you should ask yourself, is it possible that this was done by a Palestinian to frame? Of course it is. But the evidence around it needs to be considered, which is in locations, and there's multiple examples of it all across Gaza, in locations where it's basically militarily controlled, even though they're still playing games with some of them that have refused to leave. The point is, overall, it's easy to see that it's most likely exactly what we've already caught them doing, because there are videos of them doing this stuff, right? So yes, consider the possibility, but the evidence clearly points in one direction. And that shows you that this is not about Hamas. As they write, how does graffitiing civilian homes help defeat Hamas? It doesn't. It's because it's hatred. That's what this is. And we'll show you yet again, as I don't know why we need to keep doing this for some people, but that yes, they're going to be building settlements. They're having conferences repeatedly. They have money earmarked for it. So that shows you on top of all of it that if you're just going out to defeat Hamas, why did you already have pre-planned ideas of more occupation of areas the world government or the world government, the international bodies of the world are telling us have only been or only like it's the illusion of the two-state solution. That the areas they're currently doing this in, whether it's Gaza or the West Bank, are all supposed to be for Palestinian areas. And they just don't care. And both the U.S. and the UN are like, well, that's illegal. And nobody does anything about it. So my point in saying all that is that this shows you the obvious intent on top of the obviously stated intent. And they just don't care. Oh, but here's Trump telling you that that's all okay.
Obviously, the White House is issuing its stark warning. Do you think that the U.S. is not doing enough to show support for Israel, or are you going to go?
Biden has totally lost control of the Israel situation. He has abandoned Israel. He's totally abandoned Israel. And frankly,
abandoned Israel, right? So he has helped this government commit the most obvious genocide we've ever seen in over a process of 6 months, and only just barely started to push back. And that's abandoning Israel. Who do you think's telling him this? Well, first of all, Trump would probably say that regardless of whether it's true or anything, because it's going to help him for the election, which is what he says here at the end as well, which I think is hilarious, and I'll point it out then. But either way, it's obvious that all of them are pro-Israel. I mean, they're all fighting over who's more pro-Israel, and doesn't that show us in and of itself what's going on here? It's so crazy to me. Watch what he says at the end, though. It's ridiculous.
You know, he's a low IQ individual. He has no idea where he is and who he's supporting. He doesn't know if he's supporting the Palestinians, but he knows one thing. He is not supporting Israel. He has abandoned Israel. And any Jewish person that votes for a Democrat or votes for Biden should have their head examined.
Right. So you're not Jewish unless you vote for Trump. Got that? This is the typical game. This is the Ben Shapiro, Rabbi Shmuley. They've all been doing the same thing. It's the same constant game, which proves to you that it's not about Judaism. It's about Zionism telling you who's allowed to be Jewish as long as you do what we say. And that's crazy. These are people that are Jewish because that's their religion. And they're basically, I mean, the overall point here is he's talking about Jews, not Israelis, Jews. There's plenty of Jews that do not believe Israel represents them. So all he's really highlighting there is that he is part of the illusion. He is clearly going, yep, this is leaning into the overall lie. And the worst part of it, what do you think? How do you not? The only way to take that is what's happening in Israel, in Gaza, is not enough. That he's abandoned Israel, which means that if he wasn't, they'd be doing more. I mean, it's just so obvious that this person in the same place would probably have allowed this even more. I don't even need to say probably. I think that's obvious. Just like he did Golan Heights, Jerusalem. I mean, he jumped over these red lines and just didn't even care. And I think what's crazy about it is that Biden has done literally all the same stuff, and he's just trying to at least pacify certain people, which, I mean, they're all politically inept at this point because they've all completely put themselves in with Israel at all costs. Where we just lost. There we go. So I want to read what Decentered News wrote, just simply pointing out Biden helps Israel commit genocide. Trump, you know what's wrong with Biden? He's not pro-Israel enough. Unreal. He's totally abandoned Israel. I just think that's absolutely shocking. Now, in regard to the same point, and this is going to bring us into the idea of the legalities, and we're actually going to go back to a really interesting point from 2009 to show you how not new all of this is. And again, the overlap. Remember, I was saying in the beginning about the leaders, the rulers. Tom Cotton is one of the most ridiculous amongst them, who just is so obvious, it's blatant the way that he just goes after a political objective and has nothing to do with, like when he was going after the TikTok guy, and it was embarrassing. He should have been embarrassed by that. Just clearly like a dog with a bone, and it just, and acting like his answers or non-answers somehow mean what you think they mean. And they certainly could, but it's very embarrassing how the answers are just being, I mean, you guys remember it. Basically just going, are you secretly Chinese? No. Well, is your family, his questions just showed an intent and not a seeking for the truth, which by the way is what they all do. And so in this case, this is Tom Cotton asking Austin in a very, very obviously deliberate way, which makes me wonder who was driving him to make this statement. So Austin will be forced to say what he's so much. It doesn't need to be, obviously. I don't believe these people are honest, but knowing that he would say a thing that isn't going to mean there is no evidence, that they just want to get a soundbite for so that they can repackage it like this, which Hanania Naftali is, Mr. Lead propagandist here, and just goes, U.S. has seen no evidence Israel's committed genocide, which, by the way, means literally nothing, seeing as how the U.S. government is complicit in this genocide. So it's the same as we investigated ourselves and found ourselves not guilty. But that's not even really what he says. If all you read was that statement, it's clearly manipulative. So let's listen to what he actually says, which is essentially the same thing. But what he's really what he's saying is that we haven't seen it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And clearly the U.S. government has pretended that they have yet to see any evidence, even though the whole world, including the world court, has seen that and said, yeah, it's got merit. So it doesn't mean anything, as I say right here. Well, it's a good thing that the fake investigations of those involved in this obvious genocide, like the U.S. government, is meaningless. What the world court decides is what ultimately matters. I said, and I said, this is important. Matt Miller, remember what he said? I said, well, hey, Matt Miller, what happened to we have to wait for the investigation? Or does that only apply one way? Well, you obviously know the answer, and it's right here.
You talked a lot with Senator Reid about Israel's responsibility to provide aid in Gaza. Why does Israel have a responsibility to provide aid to Gaza? Israel was the victim of an... Secretary Austin, thank you for acknowledging in response to Senator Wicker that Hamas committed war crimes on October 7th and has been committing them every day since by using human shields. I want to address what the protesters raised earlier. Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza?
Senator Cotton, we don't have any evidence of genocide being created.
So that's a no. Israel's not committing genocide.
Wow.
In Gaza.
We don't have evidence of that, to
Thank
my knowledge.
you.
Yeah.
See, he's wanting an answer. He's trying to make this happen.
Last month at the Intelligence Committee when they dodged that question. You stand accused by those protesters of greenlighting genocide. Would you like to respond to that accusation?
Which they have no standing to
What I
make
would
this claim.
say, Senator Cotton, from the very beginning is that we committed to help assist Israel in defending its territory and its people by providing security assistance. And I would remind everybody that, what happened on October 7th was absolutely horrible. Numbers of Israeli citizens killed, and then a couple of hundred Israeli citizens taken hostage.
American citizens as well.
American citizens as well.
So you deny the accusation that you greenlit genocide?
I absolutely deny.
Okay. For the record, I don't think Israel's committing genocide. I don't believe you greenlit genocide either. You talked a lot with Senator Reid about Israel's responsibility to provide aid in Gaza. Why does Israel have a responsibility to provide aid to Gaza? Israel was the victim of
actually, I'm gonna wait on that. I'm gonna wait on that one since that's the one we're gonna get to in the next segment. It's same conversation. It's an important point. But here, just think about the way he started this, right? The whole just take it in reverse to what they're saying about the World Court. You didn't even mention Hamas well, they did in fact, but the point was not about how it got started. The point is regardless of whether Hamas committed X, Y, and Z, which you feel justifies a response, that you then carried out a response over 6 months that equals genocide, right? So the idea that they don't include, but Hamas is guilty of everything they say is the way they're trying to make it seem like they're hiding that. But let's just play the same game in reverse, but actually make it more sound. Which is if you're going to stand here and argue whether they're not committing genocide and then only point to one day of the whole thing, acting like that's all that matters, it's cartoonishly stupid. And of course, he starts out by saying that Hamas took human shields, which not a single person has yet to prove ever in the context of October 7th forward. My point is that ultimately, they've put up things that then have been debunked even by human rights groups, saying, nope, that was not in the location you claimed it was. Nope, that's not what you said it was. I'm not even debating. In fact, I find it hard to believe that there wouldn't be examples of that because it's obvious that Israel is openly doing it. It's obvious that every entity seems to do this in wartime. Nobody should be okay with that. But we can very clearly prove, for instance, that the moderate rebels did that as a matter of policy, that we just don't like to talk about it. or the idea that we can prove that the neighbor procedure is an open policy that the Israeli government actively uses to this very day. But why doesn't that matter? 2013, Palestinian children tortured, used as shields by Israel, per the United Nations. Reuters. Israeli soldiers who used Palestinian boy, a 9-year-old, as human shield of... You guys have seen the clip. You guys have seen the clip many times. It goes on for 45 seconds. There's 8 different examples, all from leading entities in the world that we're supposed to understand, that say, oh, yep, they're using human shields. It's called the neighbor procedure, that they told them was a problem. They didn't care. They still use to this very day. Who cares? But he goes on to say that the Hamas is using them without any evidence, just because Israel said, and that therefore means that every single day sounds they've committed a war crime, which, if they were actually doing that and you could prove it, well, you could argue that. But then are you just going to ignore the at least 7 other examples? I think it was 6, if I remember correctly. We've shown 4 that I could prove on the show. Bottom line, multiple examples of human shields already being used by the IDF. I mean, like, visible. Here they are on camera using them in front of this tank. Here they are using this guy sitting down blindfolded in the middle of the street as they fire over him at these other people. It's just, it shows you that this guy is lying to you. That's not that shocking, but recognize how important it is with the current situation of the world that these people are getting up and they're knowingly lying about something that is huge to what they claim they're trying to accomplish, rules-based international order, international law. And he's just lying to you. And this is one of the smallest examples today. And then goes on to make these arguments about how, well, were they committing genocide? Okay, well, why does Austin have any standing when he says that? He doesn't. Exactly why it doesn't matter when these people say it's not or it is, because the only way we prove that is what we're actually being told is through the process and the investigation, the court, not whether Austin feels that way or not. But then now here we go. The U.S. government said, as Naftali Bennett shares it, or was it? No, it was Naftali Bennett's it's Hananya Naftali says, U.S. Secretary confirms there's no evidence. Well, no, he didn't even say that technically. The bottom line is, it's trying to set the narrative before this actually finishes, while we can prove that they are committing war crimes at a rapid pace that everyone in the world seems to be acknowledging. But I guess it's okay for Matt Miller to not acknowledge what's happening because we haven't finished investigation, but we can come out and say it's not happening without that investigation, because that's just logical, right? These people are horrible liars. I mean, we are a laughing joke around the world right now. Not just because these people are, every government's lying, but because this government is standing up, acting like they're on some ivory tower while they are seemingly the worst example of what they're pointing at. That's embarrassing. And it's not hard to see in the world right now. Now, here is a really ridiculous article. Hamas laid a genocide trap for Israel, which the clear point in this is essentially that, okay, well, they knew we would act like this, so it's their fault. Oh, okay, so they knew you were genocidal, so it's their fault for poking you? That's not a really great argument, but it shows you that even whether you want to make it the word genocide or not, that's the argument, guys. That they set this up so that they would respond and they would go, oh, genocide. Well, you're the one killing children. But here's what it says. Just a couple of points I think are important. The attempt to ascribe to Israel a plan or intent to commit genocide will always clash with the patterns of the Holocaust memory, leading to a not genocide verdict. Now, what's crazy is that's not being stated as, that's crazy, that shouldn't be happening. The opposite, in fact. He's stating that as if it's a static reality that we should all accept. He goes on to say, if Israel is found guilty of genocide, like by the World Court, for example, or anybody else that has any standing, it goes on to say, then the world would be lying. This is not a joke. Since Israel did not plan a final solution, well, how the hell do you know that? First of all, that very well could be the case. And frankly, I think it's quite obvious that it is. And we could point to many different, like the decisive plan or many others, whether you want to argue they're killing or ethnic cleansing. And nonetheless, the point is exactly the same. But this person says they don't. Well, because I don't want to believe that. And somebody once said that's never possible. Or let's just go back to your original point, that if they ever make that claim, it's fake because, you know, what the Jews went through. That's exactly what he's saying right there. And he says, since Israel did not plan a final solution for the annihilation of the Palestinian race, except they kind of did, and that's what we have in our heads when we hear about genocide. Okay, is that what genocide means? No. So you're saying our personal feeling of the word, because we only ascribe it to what happened to Jews during World War II, is the only thing that matters. That's what he's literally saying here, and saying that if you claim they did, it's a lie because that's not possible. And if they decide to rule that it is guilty, well, they're going to be lying because, again, it's not possible. And then it goes in to say they didn't plan a thing that I think they did, and ultimately he can't know that. But it says regardless of what South African explains to us. Oh, so now you're genocide explaining? That's not going to work. I mean, this is absolutely cartoonish. And either way, obviously, regardless of whether you lived through a Holocaust, which is a word that is not only pinned to what happened in World War II, it has a meaning, then it doesn't mean that you can just go on acting like you're never able to be accused of that. It's just unbelievable to me. Now, it says if Israel's found to be not guilty of genocide, this is the craziest part, actually, it will then celebrate its blamelessness and resume its sense of singularity in occupying the slot of the only victim of genocide in the Western world. I mean, you genuinely would want to think this feels like sarcasm. It's not. You can read this for yourself. It's actually pretty crazy. And ultimately, what he's really saying there is that, okay, well, if it's found to be guilty, well then, or not guilty, well then that will be correct. Now, there is a little bit of a, there's some level of disapproval to some of this, but I actually find that it's shocking to me that this is just understood as the reality. It's like saying believe women, which crazily enough, they've actually come out and done. Believe all Israeli women. Well, that's exactly on the nose because believe all women is a stupid thing to say because can they not be lying? No, you should just consider what their claims are and do your due diligence. But that's not as fun to say, is it? But it says the attempt to reverse the roles in this backdrop for the discussion of The Hague, no matter how much they'll try to make us accept that the Holocaust was not the only manner of genocide and that Mein Kampf or the final solution are not the only ways of expressing intent. Well, that's true. So you're telling me the only way you can ever claim genocide is if you do so through the context of Mein Kampf and some final solution? Well, then why are you claiming Russia's doing it? Why are you claiming Rwanda or anybody else? This is inconsistent with anything they've ever said before. But it says, but whereas for the world, this is a psychological yearning, in the case of Hamas, it was a calculated move. Ah, okay. So they know you're going to do something bad, so it's their fault for poking you. But it says they learned from the Zionist experience and from the contribution the Holocaust made to the establishment of the state of Israel. I don't think they realize what that sounds like, but of course, if you understand the history, what they're kind of saying is they learned from, Zionists. Well, I mean, I don't even know how you don't read it that way. Zionists using the Holocaust to achieve the state of Israel. That's what they just wrote right there. But of course, they don't mean it in a way I would argue is that like it's a manipulation. It's just like, but then that's why it's important to make sure you understand that the Zionist government, or rather at the time, the Zionist organization was working with the Nazi Party, was working with fascist entities on the record, by the way. You can look it up on Wikipedia. So it doesn't make much sense to pretend, as Dan Cohen has covered, they did this well past the final solution. So how are you going to pretend that that was the foundational reason for creating the state of Israel, even though you did that while that was happening? It doesn't make any sense. But it goes on to say, it says, for Hamas, recognition of a genocide perpetuated. I think that's perpetrate. Excuse me. I got perpetrated or perpetuated in my mind. I just couldn't get it. That's so weird. I thought they just misspelled that. So perpetrated. I did it again. That's so weird how the mind works. Perpetrated. For Hamas, recognition of a genocide perpetrated against the Palestinian people could make the world and the United Nations act in the same manner it did following the Holocaust. It says, and to finally advance the establishment of a Palestinian state. So, I mean, you're framing it as what they're doing is a manipulation, like they're tricking the world. But you're saying they're doing exactly what the Zionists did. It was just that you're just claiming that the Zionists did it and it was honest because it was a genocide, but they're doing it and it's not because it's not a genocide. That's the foundational argument here. But it is, though. At the very least, it's clear that you're killing lots of people. So it just is crazy to me that this person can't see how bad this looks, in my opinion. Maybe they do. Don't care. But it says a real discussion cannot ignore the fact that Hamas laid a genocide trap for Israel. I mean, that's just so crazy to me. It says the construction of for itself a network of tunnels, which, by the way, we already know I think largely were built by Israel. At the very least, Al-Shifa's was, and that's admitted by former Prime Minister Barak. But it says it planned and executed a murderous attack in the style of a pogrom, which this time, for the first time in history of pogroms, the Jews have an army to fight back. Well, that's not even remotely true. And the bottom line is there's been all sorts of attacks that Israel's been. It's a misrepresentation to always frame it as the Jews have always been persecuted and always been the victims. The reality is that changed a long time ago. But you can conclude there's still racism. There's still people that attack people for who they are. But the bottom line is that there has been lots of pogroms and lots of atrocities committed by the Zionist government way early in this conversation against Palestinians, going back to 1948 and since. And by the way, the kind of crimes that we know were committed against the British too. Remember this conversation to realize that this is not just some unique focus and only one way? Before they basically gave Palestine, because they were being attacked, which rewards terrorism, which we'll make a point about that in a minute. Damn it, man. Hold on. I'm trying to involve you in the background here. This is the same problem I keep dealing with. I don't know why. I think it has to do with the browser. But let me delete one thing really quickly.
But she said the flu for 14 days.
Sorry, didn't want that one.
NBC News National Security Court.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to delete some stuff really quickly, and I keep bumping these buttons. I would just skip this, actually, but I find this to be kind of an important clip for the point we're making right now. You know, the idea that historically they were attacking everybody, which, again, will be important for a point we're about to make, which is about the rewarding of terrorism, which that's the history of Zionism. Quite frankly, it's clear. And here's an old report from AP telling you that.
Swedish diplomat Count Folke Bernadotte was appointed as UN mediator in Palestine. His mission was to seek a peaceful settlement. Count Bernadotte surveyed the devastated Palestinian villages and visited refugee camps in both Palestine and Jordan. In a report, he wrote, "It would be an offense against the principles of elementary justice if these innocent victims were denied the right to return to their homes." On September the 17th, 1948, the day following his UN report, the motorcade of Count Bernadotte was ambushed in Jerusalem. He was shot at point-blank range by members of the Jewish Stern Gang.
Wow. There's so much history that people, they just are so desperately, Zionists are so desperate to try to hide from everybody, which, by the way, don't forget, again, is why they have an entire just legislation that's designed to kind of just cap off and hide and, store away somewhere in a vault anything that makes the world recognize what they really did throughout their history. I mean, there's an entire policy for it. Journalists and Haaretz talk about it all the time. And even new things get added, by the way. So that point, I think it was just finished to simply say that, and when Israel responds with the intensity of never again, the ones waiting for the response and sustaining most of the fire were not Hamas terrorists who were protected in their tunnels, but the people who were deliberately left exposed to the genocide, in the quotes, that would surely follow. Well, I mean, so you're admitting that you're killing the people, so why is genocide in quotes? Like, it's just so weird the way this is framed. It feels like a desperate move. So you're kind of halfway admitting that, yeah, we're killing a lot of people, but not to the point of genocide. But so how is that a trap? All that, it's only a trap if what you're saying is they knew we would go too far. Well, yeah, we all know that, and we're all watching it. So I guess don't think they thought this one through. I don't know. At the end of the day, it's very telling. Now, also, let's make sure we understand that the ICJ has found that the claims are plausible or have merit in regard to genocide. That's important. There are all these lies flying around about this right now. So here's what Emily Schrader, who is seemingly one of these newer pushes, from the spokesman out there, who's speaking up, claiming, and her full technical title, I believe, is the, it doesn't even say it right there. What is she? She was I think she's just one of the spokesmen for the Israeli genocide, It says, this is going to piss off here's how she frames this too, because she's very professional, right? All the decorum in the world. Going to piss off all the whiny free Palestine brats, but it needs to be said. I mean, guys, most of these Israeli representatives have no decorum. They're not responsible. They just kind of, they act like, like just some random person on Twitter. Like, they have a right to do that. My point is, though, that it just shows you a level of There's a good word for this. Like the way I framed it the other day is people that gained a lot of power without truly having to earn that. And I think at the end of the day, you get these people that are in high positions of power that are there that are just not responsible. Like they're not grown-ups. You know what I mean? The way that they act, the way they conduct themselves, and they're petty and they're small. And it's you see it in the way they conduct themselves on these interviews. They lash out at people. They're very short. But here's what she says. And it's just lie upon lie upon lie. First, she says 30,000 casualties is not confirmed. Why? Because the terrorist organization telling us that. Like they just keep doing this, despite the fact that, guys, it's so transparent. Just one of the examples that this is Vice News. Not that we should trust Vice, but it's a public conversation. Israeli intelligence has said that these are accurate. The IDF said they were reliable. Those were both quotes. That's coming from the Gaza Health Ministry. And what they're saying is the numbers they're using are accurate, and they use them in their military and their intelligence reports right now. And she just is hoping that you don't know that. So that's my point. Whether it's in the U.S. or anywhere else, and it's not hard to see with Israeli representatives, but she knows that. They know for sure that's the case because they've, at the highest levels of power, they've put that out there. And she just lies about it, hoping to doubt somebody to kind of cast doubt on how clear they're committing genocide. It's now 45,000 people, apparently, we can see generally, and over 20,000 children. And again, we just heard a doctor in the beginning telling you that 70% of what he's seeing are children in the hospital, but nobody cares. But she lies there. Okay, then she goes number 2. But let's assume it's accurate. So this is the way I love that they're doing this, because they come out and they go, totally fake. But even if it is real, here's why it doesn't matter. So you're just covering all your bases. I get it. But it says 30,000 casualties, at least 12,000 of which are combatants. Well, nobody's proven that. You guys can keep saying all the things you want, but it increasingly gets more and more impossible to believe when you never produce anything to back it up, other than things that have often shown to be false, like graphics and highly edited posts. But then they go, it's not a genocide. Well, okay, but then right down here, you go into the fact that genocide has metrics like intent. So then why are you saying that the numbers wouldn't matter? Again, it's just about throwing it at the wall. If we just throw everything at the wall, some of it might stick, right? It says, yes, thousands of civilians have died. Well, okay, thanks for admitting you're committing genocide. We appreciate that. Well, again, it wouldn't be the only thing. But why is it okay that thousands of civilians have been killed? We're going to go over which, by the way, even I have a hard time accepting as the way it should be. I don't think that's the case. But the actual dynamics around proportionality in international law. And we'll show you why this doesn't make sense. So just the attack on the Jabalia refugee camp, when they openly admitted one person for 400 civilians were killed, and it turned out he wasn't even there. That is exactly what they've admitted to, and that right there proves they're committing crimes. Because even that does not, and it's obvious, that doesn't meet the proportionality point. We'll come back to it. But they've admitted this stuff up, down, left, and right, over and over and over. She goes, yes, it's sad. Oh, because we can clearly feel that from you, right? You're so sad by it. It says, but it's also a war. And that's what happens in war. This is this blithe response we've been getting from these people, just blasé about it. It's war, people die. You know, it's like saying, 500,000 kids died in Iraq, but do we think it's worth it? I mean, that's why Madeleine Albright, for the rest, as much as they always try to kind of keep her, just like with Hillary Clinton, they just kind of, they have power. But the world collectively sees them as the disgusting thing that they are. And not because of the statement on top, that makes it even harder to ignore, because of what they've done. But they put that person out, make that statement, and that's them forever. Right? So that's what they're doing here. It's not just what happens in war. You're murdering children, and we can prove it's on purpose. And then you come out and just kind of describe it as something that just happens. And that's my point about how saying, well, what about the U.S. does it? Well, yeah, we know that actually. But you're only admitting that you're doing it by pointing at the U.S. and acting like outraged that we don't care about both, even though we do. The war is a legal one. It's a defensive one. I mean, do I even need to comment on that? I mean, it's just, you just keep repeating that to your pillow. I'm sure it'll work out for you. This entire line of accusation is preposterous to anyone who's actually been in war. Have you been in war? Just because you served in the IDF and wrangled children in the street does not mean you've ever been in war, Emily. I mean, maybe she has. My point is that a lot of these people acting like they know, I'll show you plenty of people that have been in wars, including one we'll come to next, where they're going, hey, I'm Jewish and I've covered wars and I know war crimes when I see them. And then, of course, gets called an anti-Semite, Jew-hating or self-hating Jew, because that's the only response to have to when they break ranks, right? Whether it's Israelis or anybody else. But it says a 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 combat ratio is unheard of in urban war. But that's not even what's happening. And that's why they keep harping on the idea that 12,000 combatants. Feel free to prove that anytime. They won't, because they can't. But that's how they keep banking on this ratio. But even then, are you okay out there with, so they kill 1,000 combatants and they kill 3,000 civilians? Are you okay with that ratio? Is anybody? Have we ever been? No, guys. Just because they write some document in the State Department that makes that's the acceptable ratio, I don't give an F about their claimed ratio. That's crime. That is murder to me. And all they're doing is normalizing the way they conduct war. The U.S. has no moral standing to set some kind of metric for what is and is not a problem. The U.S. government is the problem. And really, the overarching point here is that whether you're the first or they're the first, you're both clearly leading the way when it comes to what the problems we're dealing with today. All stem back to what we're talking about. But it says this third, genocide requires intent. And get this. She says, Israel is not doing this, despite the fact that we have the ability. So you can't resist the idea to be like, we could genocide you. We just don't want to. Like, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That statement is meant to be a jab. You couldn't help yourself, could you? Because you're a child. But it says Israel has delayed operations to give them time to evacuate. No, you've lied about that, including how multiple investigations from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, right? Who tell you that you're lying about that. I'll include this one just for good measure because it just so obvious. This one just says horrifying cases of torture and degrading, including rape of Palestinians. That's November 8th, 2023. But we don't care about the human rights groups anymore, apparently. Israel, that's the wrong one. Well, Israel's apartheid. That's a good one, too. Damning evidence of war crimes. October 20th, and I've shown this many times, between the 7th and 12th of October. Right in the beginning, guys. From day one of the October 7th genocide forward, they committed war crimes so let's not pretend like this was some engagement problem. What it's found, evidence of war crimes against, that wiped out entire families. 5 different examples they investigated, and each one of them, they found the evidence that they either targeted civilians, chose not to tell them they were going to bomb, or just didn't take any precautions at all. So many examples. And here she says, we did all of this. But then point is that just the joke that they aren't giving intent, that you haven't spoken up, including yourself, and said explicitly that none of them are innocent. It's disgusting. Then she says there's zero evidence of the majority of victims are women and children. I mean, it's the kind of thing that is obviously the investigations have routinely shown that. We just showed you a doctor telling you he's seen 70% children in there. Dr. Maynard said the same thing. Any doctor you talk to is saying they're treating mostly children. So, and then on top of that, you can clearly prove that the population is mostly children and you're bombing everywhere. So it's not too difficult to understand. They're just trying to gaslight for genocide. I hope that people end up in prison. Israel's not causing a famine. Well, let's talk about that, shall we? Because it's one of the most obvious aspects of all of this. She stopped regurgitating Islamist talking points. So see, what she's doing there is claiming anyone now saying that it's like when you were talking about during the election and saying that, Russia pointed this out. Now you're suddenly a Russian shill for Russian talking points. No, I was just saying what I think is the fact. And if Russia's saying that too, or any number of ways it works, right? So here what they're saying is if you're pointing out that they're committing a famine, well, now you're a shill for the Islamists. You're a useful idiot for the Islamist terrorists. It's they don't have any new material. They just apply the new thing to the new game over and over and over. It's embarrassing. So let's talk about this one. Here's what this guy said. I'm Jewish and I can read. Period. Okay. So are you insinuating this guy can't read, even though he wrote this article? Or are you just trying to be insulting because you don't like that he pointed out in very, very clear and obvious and objective what he saw there? But he goes, I know a pitiful Jew-hating excuse for journalism when I see it. So just like Ben Shapiro and the rest of them, you're suddenly not Jewish if you just disagree with these Zionists. Why can't they recognize how clear that is? Let's look at this, though. April 9th, this year. It says, how does it feel to be a war crimes reporter whose family bankrolled the nation that's committing war crimes? He goes, I can tell you. It's an interesting overlap. So not only is he Jewish, his family goes back to the foundation of Israel. And think about how ridiculous it is for this random guy. Well, apparently he's an editor at Table Mag. Great. Good job. The point is that ultimately this guy, because he's Jewish, thinks he's, well, rather a Zionist Jew, thinks he's got the standing to just renounce this guy's Judaism because he doesn't agree. Is that what a journalist does? No, that's what a propagandist does. That's what a wildly partisan manipulator does. Even if you disagree, you can say, well, we disagree. Here's why I think that. Here's why he might think that. I think he's wrong. That's what grown-ups used to do, right? Not today, not anymore. But it says, my ancestors were key funders of Jewish immigration to British-controlled Palestine. Yeah, Palestine, because that's what it was. And is, quite frankly, the Warburgs and Schiffs donated millions of dollars to that cause. And during the war between Jews and Arabs that started in 1948, the ethnic cleansing occupation. Because, even then, there's still points in this that I disagree with that he's saying. And what's important to realize is that, what they're funding is the illegal occupation of Palestine. There's no way around that. And the history is shockingly clear. We just have to contend with these screaming Zionist manipulators and people that are blinded by their lies who just yell that you're racist for highlighting these provable facts. But it says, when Golda Meir made an emergency fundraising visit to the United States, one of the philanthropists she met with was an uncle of this person writing this, who led the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. And in case you don't know who Golda Meir is, here is a quick clip of her also telling you that, yes, it was Palestine, and she used to be a Palestinian.
When were Palestinians born? What was all this area before the First World War? When Britain got the mandate over Palestine, what was Palestine then? Palestine was then the area between the Mediterranean and the Iraqi border.
You say there's no such thing as a Palestinian?
And West Bank, no. East and West Bank was Palestine. I'm a Palestinian. From 21 until 48, I carried a Palestinian passport.
Yeah, right out of the horse's mouth, right? She was a founding member of Israel and one of the earliest prime ministers. Kind of hard to ignore that, but they just blatantly lie about it today, right? As they do, Zionists. But going on, it says as Israeli forces grind through Gaza in what the International Court of Justice defines as a plausible genocide. There you go. It's funny how even within the corporate media now, they're battling with people over here in other corporate media going, that's not, they don't have anything. And they said there's no evidence at all. Just lying, just like blatant and in the face of provable evidence, completely lying at the highest levels of, quote, journalism. It's just so crazy how obvious it is. But it's kind of always been that way. Like I've talked about that in my starting this all these years ago. One of the first things I did was I was watching some kind of news and I'm like, hold on, here's CNN saying this and here's Fox saying that. They're both covering the same story and yet they're contradicting each other. How is that possible? Well, we know because they're lying, probably both of them actually, but the point is most people haven't come to that realization. They just accept one and deny the other, right? And the point is this is always what's going on, but just recognize that that is the truth. The ICJ has said that it's plausible, that it has merit, and they're continuing to investigate, but it says my family's history of philanthropy runs into my familiarity with war crimes. He says, when Israel bombs and shoots civilians, which they are, blocks food aid, which they are, attacks hospitals and cuts off water supplies, which they are, I remember the same outrages in Bosnia, which again, Israel was involved with. When people in the Gaza flower line were attacked, I thought of the how was that pronounced? Sarajivans? Probably mispronouncing it. This was a group that were in the context of we're talking about, they didn't even look it up right. Oh, it's weird. How would that not even pop up? Well, we'll come back to it. So the point is that when he thought of them killed waiting in a line for bread, comparing it to the Palestinians and the perpetrators who in each case insisted the victims were slaughtered by their own side. And this is the main point. Remember this. Atrocities tend to rhyme. I'm going to read you some more from this article, but remember that for the next point. It's canny. I'm going to read you something from 2009, Human Rights Watch in Israel, and it's just, it's almost painful to read the exact same narratives, the same excuses, the same like right now, these are like unprecedented, first time. Nope, here it is in 2009. Same thing, same narrative, same excuse. It pains me. And even then to argue, like, why is Human Rights Watch not making a bigger statement about how they, I don't know. But it says, going forward, I was thinking of Haris Batanovic. I tracked him to a nearby hospital the next day, and I watched an agonizing video from Gaza not long ago. The video shows a grandmother. We talked about this one. Everyone saw this one. Hala Karius, so we have the name, trying to leave a neighborhood that Israeli forces are surrounding. They were told to leave. She listened. She walked in the direction they were told to go with other people all around them. Walking tentatively, she was holding the hand of her grandson. You all saw this. 5 years old. She carries a white flag in her hand, holds the grandson's hand in the other. Suddenly, a shot rings out and she falls to the ground. The child flees to whoever he can. Sniper rifles have high-powered scopes, he writes. The shooters can see who they're shooting. The attacks on this woman in 2024 and the ones he referenced from the other example from before in 1993 occurred in daytime and were not accidental. We just heard the doctor tell you. These high-powered scopes with night vision, they see what they're looking at. He said a marksman would not shoot a child twice in the head, once in the gut. These are intentional killing of children. And this is not just an opinion, guys. I'm not trying to say I know for sure that it's from the highest levels of power. I quite frankly think that's obvious, but we have to acknowledge this is happening. I know I don't need to convince all of you, but there is a level of this conversation where people are genuinely trying to walk this back right now and act like, no, these are just over-representations and, exaggerations. This is deliberate. And we have to start making sure we're clear about that. Everyone, he goes on to say, makes their own choices. But my experience, he writes, of war crimes taught me that being Jewish means standing against any nation that commits war crimes. Any. He writes, Israel and its supporters contend that what's happening in Gaza is a legal and righteous response to October 7th attacks by Hamas fighters. He says that does not give Israel a pass to respond as it pleases. An eye for an eye or 100 eyes for one eye is not a thing in international law. It's just not. A key tenet of the laws of warfare is that an attack that endangers civilians must be militarily necessary. And any civilian casualties that occur must be proportional to the military gain, not one person who ends up not being there for 500 civilians. He says what that means in plainer language is that you cannot slaughter a lot of civilians for a minor battlefield gain, like we just explained. And you certainly cannot target civilians, as appears to have happened in the killing of the woman we just referenced, with holding her grandson, and many other Palestinians that we can prove. So far, more than 30,000 people have been reported killed in Gaza, most of them civilians, including more than 13,000 children. Now, this is coming more than just Gaza at this point, guys. This has now been confirmed after the recent pullouts, I shouldn't say confirmed, because even these numbers are in some case estimates, because we don't know how many people are buried under the rubble, right? It's an underestimate by everyone's account. My point is that even after they pulled out, the different journals that went in from both Gaza and outside, the doctors that are present, these numbers are no longer just from the health ministry. The UN has now adopted, they're not, you can clearly see, by the way, that this is more than what they're saying. And again, this is coming from I recently did a segment on this, from the human rights groups, from the United Nations. What's interesting is that every one of these, which nobody should be blindly trusting ever, have all been like tagged, oh, they're anti-Semites. Oh, well, they're this way, they're that way. Well, all you're doing is giving a justification to blindly ignore the evidence while saying that you're trusting what Israel says. That's just childishly stupid. Even if you don't want to pretend that they're knowingly lying, the person that is involved cannot be the only source of what verifies the claim. But it goes on to say, this puts all Americans, not just American Jews, on the spot. The U.S. government is Israel's principal supporter by virtue of the bombs and other weapons that continue to be provided to the extremist government of Netanyahu. We are all implicated. And by the way, that then creates the exact point we're making, where it turns the situation into the Zionist government is creating the hatred of the Jews that they're pretending are responsible, even though it's the Zionists. And people that are blinded by the lies don't know that. And then the reality of this argument of human shields becomes shockingly clear, not the provable neighbor procedure, but the abstract concept of the illegal settlements and pushing these people from all over the world. What do you think these settlements are? What do you think the settlements were that they broke into? They're like this buffer zone between them and Israel proper. And they are packed with illegal settlers. How do you not see that as the example of a human shield dynamic? Finishing, it says the idea of Jews protecting the rights of Palestinians is actually not as new as you might think. Before the Holocaust, in regard to the example of World War II, because that's just a word that has a definition, my ancestors were part of the non-Zionist movement that supported Jewish immigration to Palestine, but opposed the creation of a Jewish state. So think of how ridiculous it is. This is on the Washington Post. This is something the Zionist government is blatantly ignoring and disregarding, and in fact saying isn't true. That there were people at the very beginning that said, no, we don't support this Zionist state of Israel because it's not Jewish. It is a Zionist game using the religion. And even then, and again, this is my opinion, but it's based on a lot of Jewish organizations that are telling you that. Now, they could be wrong, sure. But if you're pretending that doesn't exist, well, you're wildly dishonest. And they're telling you, this writer is telling you, back to the origins of this, there were an entire movement that exists to this day. They were saying this is not just. Doing this in general is not okay. Then what you did to Palestinians solidified our resistance. It says the non-Zionist position was based on the concern that a Jewish state would result in violence and reinforce accusations that Jews were not loyal to America, which, guess what? It's exactly what the Zionist government made the reality, because then it creates the circumstance where they can act like they're always being persecuted and create the illusion that they need to exist to protect the Jewish people that they're putting at risk. Self-serving reality. It's a self-serving, what's the term? It's a prophecy that what's the term? I'm blanking on the term all of a sudden. The bottom line, self-serving. Then to finish, in general, 3 more things. It says, there is a largely forgotten history of what then happened in a dissenting corner of America's Jewish community, which they don't want anyone to recognize or talk about. As Jeffrey Levin writes in his relevant new book, Our Palestine Question, since the founding of Israel, quote, there have been American Jews deeply unsettled by Israeli policies toward both the Palestinian refugees and Arabs living under Israeli rule, who are fiercely dedicated to the issue. You see why this is getting attacked already? Because we're not supposed to talk about this. And you talk about this even a year ago, this guy probably would have lost his job. And maybe he still will. It says these dissenting Jews were unsettled by, among other things, the exodus of more than 700,000 Arabs when Israel was established illegally. It's what Arabs refer to as the Nakba, or the catastrophe. I said illegally, by the way. He didn't write that. Israel refused to let these Arabs return to their homes. That's the fact, guys. And they still do. That's the right of return. And it goes on, over the decades, constructed a repressive apparatus of military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza. And by the way, all of Palestine, even though if you look at UN documents, that's the truth from the very beginning. It's actually shocking to me how many people that even on this side of this don't recognize that. It's not just the West Bank and Gaza. In fact, I'll include this document again, or this one. Or wait, where was that? We'll get to it in a second. Right here. The right, no, that's what I just looked at. Anyway, it's the right of return, which we've talked about many times. Where were we? And my point is that it's very clear. It's from 1978, and it just very clearly highlights, which we'll do again in other points, that this is the fact that we just disregard, like so many others today. But it goes on to say, while Levin's book was published just before the latest convulsion, he astutely noted that, quote, some American Jews today see their support for Palestinian rights as a meaningful expression of their Jewish identity. Think about how contradictory that is to what this, like this. I know a pitiful Jew-hating excuse for journalism. Think about that. We just went over it. I mean, what is there to call Jew-hating? Are you denying that Jews have this opinion in some cases? Or are you saying that if they have this opinion, they're no longer Jewish? Yeah, that's what he's saying. It's just disgusting. That's a Zionist agenda. And that should insult every Jew in the world. It says these protesters are part of a movement that includes Jewish demonstrators who wear T-shirts that say, not in our name. You know, the ones that Ben Shapiro denigrated and said weren't Jewish and called them trash. It says their potent voices undermine the argument that all protests against Israeli violence are anti-Semitic. Because it's a dumb argument in the first place. But what he's highlighting is the obvious reality that it can't be all-encompassing, clearly. Not even to get into the fact that Semites are a very specific, or Semitic languages are very specific, and Palestinians are one of them. So it's ridiculous. But it goes on to say they help legitimize global opposition to what's being done in Gaza, and they defend not only Palestinian lives, but Jewish lives too, because they contradict the misbegotten idea that Jews as a whole are to blame for what Israel is doing. 100%. Now, here is one of the most important parts of today's show. This is from January 13th, 2009. 2009. It's entitled Depraved and Endangered. Humanitarian Crisis in the Gaza Strip. Now, what I should have done is read you this as if it's from today and then dropped it on you that it was 2009. But then you might have missed some of the points. I'm not going to reread it in that context. So I think it's important to see this as 2009, but it probably would have been shocking. And you'll see why. It says in the summary, Gaza's 1.5 million people are enduring a serious humanitarian crisis brought on by more than 2 weeks of major military operations that have magnified the impact of 19 months of a highly restrictive Israeli blockade reinforced by Egypt. The Israeli government has repeatedly denied that a humanitarian crisis exists. Doesn't that sound familiar? Information from international humanitarian organizations, United Nations agencies, and Gaza's residents themselves starkly refute that claim. Same thing as today. So everybody goes, yeah, they're starving. Or at the very least, at this point, they were dealing with a crisis. Remember, they were very food insecure right up until October 7th. So this is what they were highlighting. And at this point, it was 2009. They were in the dip of one of their blockades again, which is, by the way, always really been there. This is one of the ones like we saw now where they go, no food, no water, no fuel, same kind of thing. And they go, there's nothing happening, because at this point, right now, for those that are new to this has never been the way this conversation's gone. Imagine as if October 7th happened, they came out and said all the same things they said, and there was zero pushback. Now, to a degree, we got some of that. But I'm talking about 40 beheaded babies, everything. And it was just across the board. But, Palestinian terrorists, they committed all these crimes, and that's what has happened mostly since then, despite even human rights groups calling it out. The difference now is because what they did shook people free of the cycle. And they saw it. And now they can't put that genie back. That's how this is working. So my point is, even then they were going, this doesn't even exist. And people were starving. People were dying. They were killing people. Now imagine being a Palestinian then where nobody even cared. Not only didn't care, nobody talked about it. There was no coverage. They just said, you're all terrorists. You don't even exist, in fact. Now we wonder why people have joined whatever group they could to be able to push back. But it says information from international organizations denied that. So they say, yes, there is a problem. And we know that's the truth. Hundreds of civilians have been killed in the fighting. It goes on. A large percentage of them children. Same exact thing. So explain for me how today it's only because October 7th and human shields and all these narratives that we're acting like are some kind of new, they've claimed human shields forever. But so why didn't it change? Why did it go on for decade after decade after decade where it was the same dynamic where they're doing this and we're allowing them to stay there? Well, okay, so what changed? This was clearly an agenda. There's no way around it with the foreknowledge and everything else, but I still think a part of it was involved, not all of it. But either way, when you recognize and fold into it that they, at this time, were funding Hamas, arming them with the money, that they're giving them the money to buy the arms they would use to create the presence that they then use to justify what they're pointing at. So you realize how gross it is. They're killing the children, mostly children, while they're going after this group that they were funding. And by the way, it's the same exact thing today. I mean, it's just so overwhelmingly ridiculous.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas. So what we did...
we'll come back and play that again in full. I just wanted to highlight it for this point. That just, I mean, the moments, points like that are just undeniable. I mean, at the very least, you can still blame Hamas and still say they have to be, killed. But the bottom line is, you have to also highlight that the Israeli government made them what they are, gave them the funds to create the situation that they then use to justify killing the very people they claim they're protecting. Sounds a lot like the U.S. government, doesn't it? Goes on to say, Gaza civilians are facing dire shortage of food. Remember, we're still in 2009. Dire shortage of food, water, cooking gas, fuel, and medical care due to insecurity, the enforced closure of all of Gaza's borders, same thing, and alleged serious violations of international humanitarian law. You know what the difference was now? Nobody cared then. Nobody cared. There wasn't independent channels everywhere. Some of us were talking about it. I mean, at that point, that was a long time ago. But very few people were saying, hey, this is a crime. They closed all the border crossings. That's illegal. Well, there was just a narrative. Well, there was a terrorist, or we saw someone with a knife, or whatever. And everybody ignored it. And it never changed. Robert in Lakesh has been covering this forever. And he's highlighting this. For some reason today, people are going, wait a minute, you can't just close all the border crossings. That's causing famine. And it's putting so much pressure on the Israeli government that has never had to deal with this before. Not like this. So that's my point. This is not new. And if the claim is October 7th changed the game, then how do we explain that you've always been doing this? It goes on to say electricity is sharply down, and in some places, open sewage is spilling into the streets. Children, who make up 56% of Gaza's residents, are especially vulnerable. Now, today, still, the argument is that's their fault, even though it's not. Even though, as you can see from Human Rights Watch and everybody else, now, before, at this time of writing, that they were in control of all of this, that it is still occupied, which we'll show you next. So which means they do control the fact that the water, the sewage, everything they're dealing with there. They're manufacturing this problem, and I'll even go on to show you where they make that statement and say, this is what we're doing to them. Very different than today, again, because they don't think nobody was paying attention to them. Humanitarian law provides that Israel, as an occupying power, because that's what it is, must ensure the safety and well-being of the civilian population. Shocking how people deny this. The blockade is a form, and we'll get into that point next. The blockade is a form of collective punishment in violation of international law. Period. Prior to the current military operation, about 80% of the Gaza Strip population, 1.2 million people, relied on food aid. A significant portion was malnutritioned, and more than half was food insecure, or living on less than $2.6 per day. But security concerns caused by the current fighting have severely hampered UN agencies' food distribution operations. See, same thing. Israel's actions caused the decline. They shut the borders, they restrict the crossings, and the checkpoints, and what they then, the process of checking, and then their own engagement, the shooting at them and around it will stop them from being able to deliver in the first place. It's exactly the same. And it says, in regard to the occupying power, it's such a paramount point in all this to recognize that the reason long before October 7th, they were obligated legally to provide aid for these people is both because it's an occupied area, which alone makes it Israel's obligation to ensure the safety and everything the civilians need, or that they have access to it is the point. Not just dump everything on them, but make sure they have access to it, especially as you block everything, that they still maintain that access. But on top of that, the right of return. And the idea that these people have been displaced from their homes and legally obligated under international law to come back. And until that point, are refugees, and it's Israel's responsibility to make sure that they're safe. There's no way around it. If you didn't want that responsibility, then you shouldn't have occupied the territory and kicked them out of their homes. But it says, those in hospitals are getting only rudimentary care from facilities that lack equipment, material, and personnel. Again, 2009, same old thing. The water, sewage, and electricity infrastructure, already severely debilitated by the blockade, is now stretched to a breaking point. So you see, again, even deeper, the point is that this was happening. This is 2009. It's a new example where they're making it even worse because of what's going on. But what they're highlighting here is that they were already doing a blockade before the excuse, just like right now. So they were already under a blockade, stretching back however long from decades of the different ways they've controlled everything here. And then because of this new inflection point, they now they strictly enforce it even harder, like he did. No food, no water after October 7th. And now it's at a breaking point. But what do they claim at 2009? They broke a ceasefire. They broke an agreement. Well, no, you were already doing all the things you were doing. You just pretend and people buy it. And it says an unknown number of Gazans have been traumatized by 2 weeks of air, sea, and ground-based attacks in a small, confined area that lacks safe areas and from which escape is nearly impossible. See, the difference here is they didn't even pretend to set up safe zones. They just killed everybody. And the world didn't care because, they're all terrorists, even though it's a lie, even though international law is shockingly obvious, even though human rights groups were writing about it, same thing. The difference is you're paying attention today. Israeli military strikes have hit on or near at least, guess what, 2 UN buildings operating as emergency shelters, in one case killing 40 people. They weren't going, Hamas is running UNRWA. They weren't doing that then. They just didn't comment. Nobody cared. Israel reportedly interfered. Now, but to be clear, by the way, they've always been undermining UNRWA, but this massive Hamas is UNRWA push started after October 7th, like the way that we're seeing it today. Israel reportedly interfered unlawfully with aid or medical delivery. The Israeli Defense Forces reportedly blocked the International Committee of the Red Cross and Palestinian Red Crescent Society from accessing badly wounded and dead civilians for several days. Massive war crime. That's happened constantly as far as I've ever been covering this. And on top of that, same thing in Yemen, where they then bombed this, by the way, this has happened in October 7th forward. They bombed the ambulances. They let them pick people. They bring them. They bomb the people that are trying to help them. They bomb the ambulances that come to help those people. It's disgusting. In recent days, Israel has taken some steps to address this crisis. In 2009, the IDF announced on January 7th, 2009, that it has established a humanitarian affairs coordination center to coordinate between the different relief organizations operating in the field and those for the IDF. This is important. Beginning on January 7th, it announced a 3-hour cessation of hostilities, a so-called humanitarian pause for the distribution of aid. Ambulances were able to retrieve some of the wounded and dead. This is not even unique. This is a policy. It's exactly what they're doing today. Undermining the process, blaming the people involved, killing them half the time, right? And in this case, they're going, okay, well, we're going to coordinate with a new setup. We're going to make a new group. I'm going to get to it in a point today. That's COGAT and what they're trying to set up that works around the classic setup situation with UNRWA and the UN and everybody else. Why? So they can act like something changed because they're now in charge. It's the same thing they were doing here. And what changed? The bottom line is they pretended there was a pause and they pretended they delivered aid when all they did was manufacture the reason it was needed to begin with. And everyone sees that. It says these steps have not been enough to address the dire humanitarian concerns. Just like we're talking about today. They dump a couple boxes in front of some people and they go, there you go. We're doing everything. It's all on them. It says, according to the UN, the humanitarian pause, guess what, was totally insufficient to aid the population living in increasingly appalling conditions. Now, times that by 100 and pretend like it's going to happen today in the same way. Because this is light years away from famine, guys. They're at the point where the people are dying every day right now. Now, a couple more points. This goes into the background. The blockade of Gaza before 2009. It says Israel, which effectively controls Gaza's airspace and its land and sea borders, otherwise known as occupation, regardless of the, I think, faux Hamas election, severely limited the flow of people, food, fuel, medicine, money, and other essential goods into and out of Gaza for 19 months prior to the Israeli attacks that began on December 27, 2008. Egypt shares some of the blame for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, having largely kept its border with Rafah closed during the Israeli blockade. These restrictions, crippling in themselves, greatly diminished the ability of Gaza's residents and its infrastructure to cope with the humanitarian impact of the armed conflict, like it's not deliberate. These restrictions also amounted to a form of collective punishment by Israel against the civilian population in violation of international humanitarian law. It's like, it's just Tuesday in Israel. That's what that reads to me. Same old, same old. People just seem to see it right now. This is how long it's been going on. Long before that. Very clear. And, and even in this, it's kind of like they're arguing. It's like, well, they're going after Hamas and the Palestinians are caught in the middle. Now, I think what we're seeing today, as we should recognize, like we can see right in front of us, that it was aimed at them from the beginning. That's how this works. Now, it says, even as Israeli border closures increased Gaza's dependency on humanitarian aid, same thing today, Israel increasingly restricted that aid. Just like today, Israel allowed an average of 475 daily truckloads of humanitarian aid into Gaza during May 2007. Compare that to today, guys. They're at famine levels, and they're screaming about 118 a day, going, look, we're doing everything. It's just that transparent. So Israel allowed an average of 475 daily truckloads of humanitarian aid in general into Gaza during May 2007, 123, that's even more than right now, in October 2008, and only 6 in November 2008. An average of 6. And again, this is where we were in the beginning of this. And even right now, the point is that what they've allowed to trickle in has slowly continued that problem. It hasn't helped. The point is that this is the level you get to, and they've lied about how much is going in. Bottom line, you're manufacturing famine, and it's very clear, and this is clearly something they've mapped out. Now, it says the basis for some of Israel's actions, again in 2009, appears to be a cabinet decision on September 19, 2007, which declared Gaza a hostile territory, which, by the way, is terms we're hearing today, again, and decided to restrict, quote, the passage of people to and from Gaza and to reduce further supplies of fuel and electricity. The restrictions on fuel and electricity, repeatedly challenged in the Supreme Court by Israeli and Palestinian human rights groups, amounted to collective punishment against the civilian population. So just in case you didn't read that or didn't hear that, what they're saying is not that they believe. What they're saying is this was actually challenged in the Supreme Court in Israel. And it amounted to collective punishment against civilian population. But guess what? Nothing happened. Shocking. Israeli officials have implicitly acknowledged that the blockade of Gaza amounts to collective punishment. Yeah, because this is how obvious this is. That's like today where they go, they're all terrorists. We should kill them all. They're all, Amalek. And then Biden goes, they're doing everything they can. And Netanyahu says that in front of a CNN broadcast. It's just embarrassing. They have clearly, openly acknowledged what they're doing is meant to do what it's doing. You don't stand up and say no food, no water, no fuel, and then pretend like you're not doing that. It says, quote, there is no justification for demanding we allow residents of Gaza to live normal lives while shells and rockets are fired from their streets and courtyards at Israeli communities. That's the prime minister at the time, openly saying that in 2008. Do you think that's only gotten better? The difference today is they're just not admitting that so blatantly. Well, I mean, I take that back. They are, but just not when it comes to stating this in front of people that are writing it down or in front of the Western broadcasts. In front of their own people, they're screaming genocide. But what they're telling you there is it's just important. They're saying that the average civilians, just because they're there in a place which, by the way, we gave the money to the group to take power, then say they're supporting that group, so we claim they're all terrorists. That's as simple as it gets. You push the group into power, then claim they're all at fault because of what you did. That way you don't have to pretend that they're innocent. It's just grotesque. It's villainy. You're not going to let civilians live normal lives while the group that you funded fires at you? There's so many ways that's disgusting. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your feeling is. They're civilians. They are not allowed to be collectively punished. That's why today they just don't say it out loud, not specifically. But it goes on to say, Israeli Defense Ministry spokesman Shlomo Dror said on January 18th, 2008, if Palestinians don't stop the violence, as a collective, apparently, because they're all responsible at the same time, even if they're not involved, I have a feeling the life of people in Gaza is not going to be easy. Ugh, just makes me sick how just I can't. The fact that these people are almost gleefully going, we're going to kill all of you because you're not allowed to say, it's so on the surface. You know what it is? I guess I can't even put my finger on it half the time. I just don't want to accept that this is the level of humanity. Like even using the word humanity feels too much. Like that this exists and that the power structures predominantly of the world are aligned with it. It just makes me unhappy. It makes me uncomfortable to know that this is the reality. So there's a lot more in here you should read. Make sure I didn't miss anything. So on that note, let's talk about the larger point, not just food aid in particular, but the larger point of just like what we were highlighting, which by the way, I think that already sufficiently explained, but let's actually go into the claims and the UN discussion and so on, not just from Human Rights Watch, about whether they have a legal responsibility to support Palestine, whether or not there was an October 7th or however you frame that overlap. So here is Senator Tom Cotton, the one you already saw a second ago, asking Austin, Israel, basically stating Israel has no responsibility to provide aid to Gaza.
You talked a lot with Senator Reid about Israel's responsibility to provide aid in Gaza. Why does Israel have a responsibility to provide aid to Gaza? Israel was the victim of an unprovoked, vicious attack on October 7th. Why should they provide aid to the aggressor nation? Or aggressor, Gaza's not a nation, to the aggressors on October 7th. We didn't provide aid to Germany and Japan during World War II.
Embarrassing.
What we did provide aid to and assistance to many of the countries that we've operated in recently.
But not in World War II. If you had been in George Marshall's or Dwight Eisenhower's position in World War II, would you have wanted to provide aid to Germany?
Somebody is clearly driving his talking points, guys. I mean, it's so obvious. Like you're maneuvering this right down the line. No, only World War II. Nothing else matters. The bottom line, Austin and Cotton are very aware. And I'm not saying that because they're smart enough. The point is they know this. It's a fundamentally obvious point. The reality of this situation is that they are occupied. And the bottom line then is that they have an obligation to provide that aid. It's very transparent. I mean, look, I could easily argue that Cotton doesn't know because he probably doesn't care to or is just not that bright. But Austin, I promise you, understands that legal dynamic as a military person. So my point is, it's the same thing I'm going to make a few more times throughout the show. These are people at the highest levels of power who are sitting there and actively misrepresenting this because of the agenda. And that has to be really disconcerting for people that haven't seen this yet. This is just the way things always work. But for those that are new to the horrible reality of the way the world works today, that we are actively changing actually as we speak, these people will lie about anything. And they're currently standing up and lying about this so that they can starve children, or at least in part of starve people, but ultimately, in most immediate effect is killing these children on the ground. So as I wrote, they have a responsibility under international law to provide for the occupied territories. It has nothing to do with October 7th. That there are manipulators like Cotton willing to lie about that at the highest levels of power only makes that point. The point of the obvious influence of Zionism over people in power. Or he's wildly ignorant, likely both. But here, let's just go over a couple of points from occupation, just in case. That's always and I understand why, the starting point for Zionists to try to undermine this point. And again, I could go through 40, just the thing. There's one source I was grabbing from earlier today, and there was 7 different things they were highlighting. There's so many examples, but we'll go over just some of the ones that usually have the highest standing. Again, not to mean that we should trust any of them blindly. That never applies, but realizing that historically, any of these governments that are currently making all of the allegations, any of them, the U.S., Israel, any of them, when in the side of what they think is when they feel they're on the right of it, will always point to these groups to tell you to understand. If the UN resolution says that Iran is the bad guy, they will lean into that with everything they have and say we have to believe the UN. The same thing I just read to you from the 2009 document, right? Where it's very clear that, no, I take it back. It was the Haaretz article, the trick of genocide, where they're basically saying if they say it's genocide, then they're lying because we can't be capable of, we're not possible. You can't call us that because we lived through the Holocaust. Then if it rules that we didn't do it, well, we'll say, hooray, and we're free of it. It's like, well, it's very clear how that works, right? It's a very one-sided concept. So here is a General Assembly from 2021, a post from the UN. Resolution adopted by the General Assembly And all it says very clearly, there's a lot of points in here, and they're just going over the assistance to the Palestinian people. Gravely concerned, it says the General Assembly is gravely concerned at the difficult living conditions and humanitarian situation affecting the Palestinian people, in particular women and children throughout the occupied Palestinian territory. Just no way to misunderstand that. Like, you can't just pretend it's not occupied, even though it's routinely argued. Here's another example. It says, in its previous reports to General Assembly, the commission found reasonable grounds to conclude that the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory is now unlawful under international law, owing to its permanence and to actions undertaken by Israel to annex parts of the land de facto and de jure. That, ladies and gentlemen, is posted in 2023. So embarrassing that people try. Like, I'm not saying because the UN says it, you have to blindly believe it. Look it up for yourself and understand the history. Understand what every single person with any standing in this conversation is arguing. And I'm not saying politicians. That's what Francesca Albanese, by the way, is saying, that it's lockstep. Human rights groups, the United Nations, anybody that historically we have been told to look to when these things are disputed by the adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, they tell you what the UN say. Now, suddenly they don't like that because they're now on the wrong side of history. Well, they always really have been, but now the UN is really calling that out for whatever reason. Occupied, it always has been. Here is Amnesty International. Israel's occupation, 50 years of dispossession, written January 7th, 2017, all well past October 2005 and 6 or 7, the election discussion, which is where they pretend that they no longer occupy Gaza. It's a lie, guys. It is a game. It's semantics. The truth, the legal reality has never changed. Now here, it's just, I think it was at 6 minutes. I'll get the clip down here. Oh, that's right. I'm just going to skip this then. Quick explanation. Whatever's going on with the background of this platform, I'm now only able to upload these videos on the right side where I'm not able to stop and pause and so on. So I only am able to play this. I don't want to play all of John Bolton and make you guys listen to 8 minutes of excruciating war walrus here. But the point is he goes over a lot of this stuff, and it's just embarrassing. The idea that they're all, well, actually, we'll play the beginning of this real quick, and then I'm going to stop it because I don't want to listen to all of it. Or maybe not. Looks like I didn't download it. Oh, it's right here. So as that's loading, so he's basically going to start with the idea, as you can, I'll just read what he says here. Those who oppose Israel's right to defend itself. Do we even need to go over that again? Is there literally anybody in the world saying Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself? This is the game they play. Nobody is saying that. What they're saying is what they're doing is not defending yourself. So they create this straw man argument where you're battling. That's like debating about the definition of genocide. Well, who cares? I mean, it matters very clearly and importantly in the ultimate conversation of the ICJ. But when we're talking about what's happening, it doesn't mean if you don't meet that metric, then nothing matters and there's no wrong being done. They're murdering children. That's clear. So to those who oppose the right to defend themselves, nobody. It's everybody in the world has the right to defend themselves. This is a starting point of a manipulation. John Bolton is just a classic, horrifying manipulator. He says, are taking sides with Hamas. So if you're doing the thing that no one's doing, you're siding with Hamas. It's a dumb statement. A barbaric terrorist organization that is vehemently against democracy and freedom. Okay, then why did your allies fund them? Oh, no comment. Got it. Hamas is committing war crimes by using people of Gaza as a shield. That's all they have, guys. That is all they have.
You obviously don't get what's going on. That is an objectively pro-Hamas position by the UN Secretary General. Hamas is using the people of Gaza as a perpetual human shield. How about somebody calling on Hamas to surrender?
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you.
Oh, what a novel idea. You mean like nobody's called? It is my same point. They do that because they're trying to confuse everybody. You mean aside from like everybody, even including most of the people pro-Palestine, have all called for that? In like the highest level of the conversation. You know, like the lefties out there in politics that are screaming for ceasefire are still also calling for Hamas to surrender. Like it's very clear. That's like them saying, you've never condemned the 7th, which Fetterman recently posted. And I'm like, You mean except for like the 35 times they literally condemned the 7th? I mean, like, it's just they don't care about whether you can prove it wrong. They're just trying to convince one more lost soul to blindly support the Zionist agenda. It's very sad and desperate. What he said right there is a ridiculous lie. I mean, we already went over most of that, but he's just cementing down the argument. Here's John Bolton getting drafted back up by the Zionist regime. I don't know why. He's like one of the most hated people in politics, right next to, it's like Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Kamala Harris. These people are crazy. Everybody's, even their own people think they're crazy. Where do you think they're coming from? Who do you think supports them? Why do they have political power? I think it's obvious. The point is, he ultimately says at 6 minutes here that whose responsibility is it? They need to give them aid. And he goes, whose responsibility is it? You think John Bolton doesn't understand the political dynamic? The guy's a career diplomat and politician. He clearly understands the dynamics of occupation. He's done many of them, most of them. So clearly he is knowingly lying to hide the fact that they're murdering children. It's just it's so insulting to your intelligence. Here is Elon Levy coming out again, still lying about this, pointing to COGAT, a group that's been caught lying about humanitarian aid like 6 times during this entire process. Following coordination, the repair of the water line has been completed. Are we really pretending like they're giving new water to Gaza? Like, is anybody that stupid? Is Gantz allowing water in? He said no water, no fuel, no food. He did, and he's clearly stating that still. If you listen to him speak, guys, he's one of the most belligerent about this. He's actively saying exactly what they're not saying. The bottom line is they don't have water, and everybody involved is clearly saying that. And of course, their game is going to be that Hamas is turning it on, won't let them do it. Again, if you listen to international conversations about this going back decades, they've never had control over this. And I just read it to you. They don't have control over water and food, electric. If they can shut it off, they clearly don't have control. I know that's difficult to grasp for some people that don't want to hear it, but the bottom line is if they can shut it off, it's obvious. So here he comes out and says, Israel continues to do the historically unprecedented thing of directly supplying enemy-held territory with supply. No, you're not. Again, I wouldn't surprise me for a second that Elon has no understanding of international dynamics. He probably doesn't know any of this, but the bottom line is you have an obligation to provide that water. You don't just get to go, October 7th. These are civilians. You all pretend like you're fighting for those civilians. So when you do what you're doing, you know you're stopping it for the people you pretend you're fighting for, but we all know that's not what you're actually doing. You're directing all of your attacks towards all of Palestine and then putting out a bunch of fake documentation about pretending to help them. Like, this is like the one we showed you before where they go, oh, we helped this old guy. And then it was proven by even AP, I think, that they shot that guy in the back right after filming them help him. That's a special kind of evil that I've never seen. I mean, I know it exists. I've just never been this close and seen it. So here he is lying and hiding the fact that, no, it's not historically unprecedented. It's not. Oh, and I forgot to comment on that again, because I wasn't able to pause it. World War II. Would it be like arming the Nazis or German? I mean, well, frankly, if you're actually going to talk about the idea of the German people, well, yeah, it's very different than the Nazi party and the ones leading it, because not every German wanted what was happening. So it's like they can't even wrap their mind around how this is the same obvious overlap. But what we're talking about is giving aid to, like, the bottom line would be that the situation is not even remotely the same. You're talking about a country that it's fighting another country. Now, you could argue that it pertains to the locations of which the Nazi party had occupied, but they didn't have some. The point is that overall, it comes down to the individuals and the ongoing 75 years of continual occupation, not in the midst of an ongoing war, because that's the game here. That Israel is acting like this is either some ongoing, never-ending war because Hamas only fires rockets every so often, or when it suits their interest, they act like that's not the case at all. Hamas is in control. You can't have both. You can't pretend like it's not a state and then act like Hamas was voted in. That's stupid. That's what Cotton just did. Trapped himself with his own broken logic and said, oh, wait, it's not a state. Because you can't have it both ways. The overall, it's their obligation to continue to provide support for this group. Oh, well, I'm sorry, I trailed off. If in regard to the overlapping to World War II, if it was the same thing, it would be as if Nazi Germany took the location, let's just say took France, occupied it for the next 75 years, and then you went on to act like supporting the people that were displaced in the beginning by the German government would somehow be not justified anymore because a new thing happened. That would be the reality. But you see, they just are hoping that most people, which they seem not to, don't have any understanding of the history. And I'll include this, by the way, which you should go through. I don't want to relitigate the whole thing. Here's the show where I talked about it. Here's the document, which I believe I have open right here. The right of return of the Palestinian people. It's really important. And here's Elon lying about it again. UNRWA tells Palestinians whose grandparents were refugees that they are entitled to free healthcare. No, that's not what's happening. What you're telling them is they are still refugees because you've never given them the right to return. So that means legally you're still obligated to keep them safe and fed and protect. Yes. So you're pointing at what you're doing and acting like that's somebody else's responsibility. Again, I doubt he even knows that. The guy got fired by the most dishonest government in the world for being dishonest. That's pretty embarrassing. But I said the right of return is enshrined in the very international law that you regularly hoist on others yet consistently ignore. Israel signed an agreement to this in 1967. You've just never honored it. And UNRWA is the only group that has maintained the records for that. And that's why they've continued to go after them. As Mohammed Shihada points out, Israel's government has been literally revealing their three-stage plan to destroy UNRWA for weeks before October 7th. Technically this was before, so it's clear. I've done a whole segment on how this was a long sought plan to get rid of UNRWA because they want to remove the records of the right of return. But this is just on December, pointing out that, we have to get rid of UNRWA before the war's over. That's before the whole Hamas is UNRWA ploy. So that's where this came from. It's a step 1, 2, 3 process. If you don't understand that just by that explanation, I highly recommend you watch this show or you read this document to understand this is the central point. Not to every single dynamic around this, but the central point to why they're trying to get rid of the records and destroy all of UNRWA and remove them from the area. They're trying to pave right over the history that requires them, which has been the central point for why this whole thing has never changed. The two-state solution, quite frankly, because Israel's maintained that. But that's what the sticky point is, that they're waiting for that. Israel won't provide it or gives a justification for why they don't have to. Now, today, it's like, what plan? What refugees? What are you talking about? That's all crazy lies. You're a racist. And some people are buying it. But I think the majority aren't. But we just have to recognize how clear that is. Here is a great clip from Israeli historian, I think it's Elon Papp, reminds us why Gaza is Gaza in terms of geography. This, ladies and gentlemen, completely challenges the entire reality of what they claim is happening there. This is an Israeli historian. Pay attention.
That before 1948, there was no Gaza Strip. The strip itself is an Israeli invention. Gaza was a cosmopolitical town on the Via Maris, the road from Alexandria up to Alexandretta in Turkey. And because it was the main road on the sea, many people from different countries and cultures passed through Gaza and left an impact that turned it into one of the most cosmopolitical towns before 1948. It also had a very good system of a coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Just recently, a friend of ours found an interesting declaration in 1905 by the three heads of the religions in the city of Gaza expressing their delight in 1905 and how well are the three communities deal with issues of friction, disagreement, and conflict. Israel created the Gaza Strip because, unlike other places into which it could push the many Palestinians it expelled during the Nakba, during the 1948 catastrophe, unlike other countries such as Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, that were willing to receive the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that Israel expelled, Egypt closed its border. Egypt refused to accept even one Palestinian. And because of that, the leader of Israel, the great architect of the ethnic cleansing of 1948, David Ben-Gurion, who ashamedly has a boulevard named after him in Paris, He's a war criminal. And he decided that Israel is willing to give 2% of historical Palestine in order to turn it into the biggest refugee camp in the world. And that's how the Gaza Strip was created, by the Israelis as a kind of rectangle, a structure, a geometric kind of structure, into which Israel pushed the Palestinians from the central of Palestine and from the south that Egypt was unwilling to accept.
The ones they couldn't get rid of.
The last group of Palestinians who were pushed into
Rafah,
the Gaza Strip were those living in 11 villages on whose ruins, on the ruins of these villages, Israel built the settlements that were attacked on the 7th of October by the Hamas.
Well, look at that.
So the Hamas attacked settlements built on the ruins of the last villages of Palestine that were destroyed by the Israeli army and expelled to Gaza. In the Israeli archive, we have a very known document called Order Number 40. Order Number 40 is from the 25th of November 1948, and it was sent by the Israeli Central Command to the commander in the area of Gaza. And it has the name of the 11 villages, and the order says, and I quote literally what the order says, occupy the village, expel all the people to Gaza, burn the houses, and demolish the stone houses. Because some of the houses of the Palestinian villages in 1948 were built of mortar and straw, and therefore it was possible to burn them. But the stone houses had to be blown up by the Israeli army. So one historical context we have here is a generation of grandfathers and grandmothers, fathers and mothers, grandchildren that live either directly or indirectly the Nakba of 1948 in a very vivid way on a daily basis, not only because they are thinking about Jaffa or they are thinking about Beersheba or any other place from which they were expelled, but also by watching the Israeli settlements on the other side of the fence from which most of their parents and grandparents came from.
It's pretty powerful. I mean, the main thing that jumps out at me, that's exactly what's happening today. So all we're seeing is another attempt to do what they tried to do then. They just didn't complete the job, right? They tried to expel everybody. They killed a lot. They ethnically cleansed over 800,000 people, and ultimately were able to get them to go probably to Egypt. The rest of the countries took some, and they just jammed the rest of them into Gaza Strip. I mean, think about how obvious that is. It's what he's describing. And so today, they just jammed him a little bit further up to the Rafah, towards Egypt, the one place that didn't play ball at the time, apparently. I mean, it's an oversimplification. There's a lot more dynamic, a lot more going on, but it's kind of hard not to see how interestingly similar that is. So now here we are yet again doing the same thing, asking for other countries to take more. So the point being is, if they removed all the Palestinians, then they would have gotten what they wanted. It would have been only, it would have been exactly the same thing today, minus the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Complete stealing of the entirety of their land. So clearly this is an unresolved issue for the Zionist government. I mean, that's obvious. So here we are yet again, and they're pushing this forward based on, again, what seems to be some sort of a manufactured event that at least some level of their government was aware of. All these pieces keep falling even more snugly into place the more information that comes out. Now here on this point, the point I was just making about the history of Zionism, here's what Elon Levy says on the 10th. I can't think of anything that violates Europe's interests more than telling terrorists that if they commit unspeakable atrocities, they'll get a prize for it. Even though what we're talking about is a two-state solution, which is something that you've been pretending for 30, 40 years that you've always wanted, even though now we clearly can see that you never have, because now you're going, what's that? We've never wanted that. And now you're saying, well, how can we reward them with the thing that you've always been claiming you've wanted to accomplish? Like, you guys are, the way that you do this, the Zionist government, it's just embarrassing because you're willing to sacrifice, like, you're basically, it's sort of like the COVID-19 agenda where every other day, the new narrative contradicted what they said would never happen the day before. And you guys do it every day. I mean, obviously, the two-state solution is an important point that you claim you've been trying to allow because you're fighting for Palestine. If this was a terror prize for the Hamas terrorists, which you put into power, how was it ever different? Was it okay for you 10 years ago that Hamas would be, that you'd give a prize to him then? I mean, they're just hoping that people don't know anything and just pretend that Elon's, whatever he wrote on text on Twitter, is more important than decades of documents we can prove. He says the response to 10-7 must be to show that terror never pays. Right. Again, ignoring the history, as I showed you a moment ago, of Zionism. Let's play a clip from Elon Levy, or excuse me, Elon Levy, Avi Shalom, telling you the history of exactly that, using terrorism to drive Jews into the illegal state of Israel.
Iraqi Jews were convinced that Israel had a hand in uprooting them. After the 1948 war, there was mounting popular hostility towards the Jews in Iraq. 5 bombs exploded in Jewish sites. The series of bombs created a panic which led more and more Jews to register to leave the country. I met an elderly friend of my mother's, an Iraqi Jew called Yaakov Karkukli, who had been in the Zionist underground. One member of his group, Yosef Basri, a very, very intelligent Jewish lawyer, and his assistant, Shalom Saleh Shalom, were responsible for 3 out of the 5 bombs. Basri's controller was an Israeli intelligence officer named Max Binet, who was based in Tehran.
So we played that for you many times. This one's also important. That just showing you that this is not only what the Zionist organization did to found itself, literally terrorism, which we played the British mandate point where Britain was telling you they were attacking British soldiers and they ultimately rewarded them with the state of Palestine. We also have the example all the way to this very day, using the Hannibal Directive to seemingly kill the people that would be a problem for them. It's ultimately the same point, using terrorism to achieve your own goals, even at the expense of your own people. The U.S. government knows a lot about that.
Please don't insult the United States. We don't have a Hannibal Directive. All right? October 7th was a military defeat. October 7th was where the Hamas came across the border and took you by surprise. They killed nearly 400 Israeli military personnel. The remaining people, about 800, the majority of them were killed by you and your military, who hunted them down because of the Hannibal Directive. We now know that the vast majority of Israeli civilians killed on October 7th were killed by the IDF, by Apache helicopters, by tanks, by your own soldiers. The Israelis say as they were driving us, the hostages, as they were driving us back into Gaza, we were attacked by helicopters. One lady, you killed my husband, you killed my child, I was wounded. We know the Israelis slaughtered their own people. Benjamin Netanyahu, do not equate America with that, because as bad as we are, we don't kill our own people, you son of a bitch.
Well, frankly, I don't think that's true when it comes down to the government, right? I mean, individually, you can make arguments all day long. The U.S. government 100% sacrifices its own people. I've shown you countless examples of that. They're doing it right now. In fact, don't forget, there are 600 American Palestinians that are currently in Gaza that nobody cares about. I'm at the point on the very first week, all the Israelis and the U.S. government were screaming about the Americans trapped in Gaza because they were taken hostage. Okay, well, what about the 600 Palestinian Americans that are currently being bombed because they're Palestinian, or are now trapped in Rafah because you displaced all of them, or the Palestinian what is it, Britons? I always mix that up. Palestinians from around the world that are also trapped there that are just not Israelis. Suddenly, it shows how clearly one side matters more than the other. I mean, these are racists, guys. These are blatant racists trying to pretend that everyone else is and using terrorism to achieve its goals. Not pretending that what you've always said they were going to get based on international law is somehow now a prize contingent on only October 7th. It's revisionist history, guys. Now into the idea of not just the whether they should be providing aid, because that's a broader conversation about all sorts of other things, but just the food part of it itself. To recognize how insultingly obvious just this is. This is from Human Rights Watch from April 9th of 2024. Israel's imposed starvation deadly for children. And it says, children in Gaza have been dying from starvation-related complications since the Israeli government began using starvation as a weapon of war, a war crime, Human Rights Watch said today. Now, you could take that two ways, and I think that's what they're trying to insinuate, is that this doesn't just start on October 7th. I just read you one talking about this in 2009, saying the same things. So all they're saying is, children in Gaza have been dying from starvation complications since the moment they started doing this. Not just October 7th, but their entire occupation. Doctors and families in Gaza describe children as well as pregnant and breastfeeding mothers suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration, and hospitals ill-equipped to treat them. It says the Israeli government, this is a quote, use of starvation as a weapon of war has proven deadly for children in Gaza. This is the director of Human Rights Watch. Israel needs to end this war crime, stop the suffering, and allow humanitarian aid to reach all of Gaza unhindered. Now, is Human Rights Watch part of Hamas now too? Probably saying that somewhere. A United Nations coordinated partnership of 15 international organizations, apparently all of which are Hamas, because there's no other explanation, and UN agencies investigating the hunger crisis in Gaza reported on March 18, 2024, that, quote, all evidence points toward a major acceleration of death and malnutrition. The partnership said that in northern Gaza, where 70% of the population is estimated to be experiencing catastrophic hunger, famine could occur anytime between now and next month. Or in May, or I guess technically that is now next, but that says March and May. But it goes on to say, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who heads Kamal Adwan Hospital's pediatrics unit, told Human Rights Watch on April 4th that 26 children had died after experiencing starvation-related complications in his hospital alone. So these numbers we're hearing about, I mean, we've heard 26, like that's in one hospital. I guarantee the North is overwhelmed at this point. That's where we're not even getting a lot of information from. He said that at least 16 of the children who died were under 5 months old. At least 10 were between 1 and 8 years old, and that 73-year-old man suffering from malnutrition had also died. So right there, that's more children than even what, like, all the narrative they claimed about 40 beheaded babies. Let's not forget those were all lies. At the end of the day, it turns out there were 2 children of the baby level age that were killed. One shot through a door, which probably was the IDF, and I think the other one died afterward. And I forget the actual overlapping point was that it's unclear who actually killed them. Could be Hamas, could be the IDF. Both make sense at this point. Of course, I'm sure some people would argue that Hamas wouldn't do that. I disagree. I think that it's multifaceted. I think there's obvious problematic people in any situation, no matter how altruistic you think the ultimate group is. But the point, that's more than the entire number of what we're told were killed on October 7th. And yet still, it's only about redirecting rage to one point. 6 months ago, while just then, a couple children were killed in Gaza. Deliberately. It says, Dr. Safia said one of the infants died at just 2 days old after being born already severely dehydrated, apparently exacerbated by his mother's poor health. She had no milk to give him. That was a quote. It's disgusting. Now here's the Guardian from the 9th. Hell on earth. Famine nears in northern Gaza despite Israeli aid pledges. Now this one did refresh. Luckily, I saved these. This seems to only happen. And this one. So it says, inside the hospital where doctors are undergoing treatment for malnutrition alongside their patients, surgeons say they are carrying out increasing numbers of amputations owing to the effects of hunger. I haven't even heard that before. So people are getting legs amputated and arms amputated because they're starving. Like, I know it overlaps in some ways with having like a wound that just doesn't heal because you're not able to do that. Your body doesn't have the ability. I said this before, most people in the West you can't even frame your mind doesn't even comprehend what these people are dealing with. I don't. I've never suffered famine. I don't know what it feels like or what's going on. I mean, let's not even forget, like, even going over to the World War II conversation, one of the famous conversations is when the Allied soldiers, I forget the name of the location, but it's the one that's most famous. When they got there, the people were so starved to death, such serious famine, that they gave them milk and it killed them, which I even had to look into. I'm like, that can't be true. Apparently there's a whole thing that when you're that malnutrition, that your body can go into some kind of, it can hurt you, it can kill you if you just drink milk and certain things like too fast, which I thought was wild, but apparently it's a very real thing. And my point is that you can even factor that into the, just dumping a lot of food in these people, as I think I'm going to read in a moment, is not right now. The experts are going, not even just dumping all the food on them is enough to actually solve this problem right now. Famine is not here's a meal and you're good. Right? Your body is so desperately malnutrition. It takes more than just food over the like in the case of, like, eventually you give enough food to somebody, they're probably going to get past that. But a lot of these people might be so malnutrition that even just food right then, they'll probably still die. Now, I guarantee people are going to shout back. You look this stuff up, guys. When I went through all this in regard to that one point, I forget where that came up. It's actually pretty crazy to read about what the body does when it's at that point. I mean, it's literally eating itself. It's crazy. It makes me sick to think this is happening to children, infants, let alone parents trying to maintain some kind of anything for the surrounding family. It just makes me sad. Goes on to say, everyone here has lost more than a quarter of their body weight. Everyone, it says, due to malnutrition. There's no food. Imagine trying to deny all of this, as even the corporate media is highlighting it. Now, it says Scott Paul, the head of the U.S. government advocacy for Oxfam, said simply flooding the area, here's right here, with food was unlikely to solve the hunger crisis. Which, again, we've already touched on this in that segment, probably, I think that was maybe months ago, more than that even. Quote, in the North, we are talking about a famine situation where putting food on someone's doorstep or dropping it off from the sky or offloading from a pier could be dangerous. Now, I actually don't know if they mean that in the sense of the fact that we've already seen multiple airdrops kill children. It's not a joke. I've seen at least 2 where they just drop them on a crowd. It smashes a child. I mean, it's so like perverse. This whole thing is so ridiculous. But or they mean what I'm talking about. I don't know. But it goes on to say it's not just minimally helpful. It could be dangerous to severely acutely malnutrition people. That's why I think that's what they mean. The kind of humanitarian assistance needed to bring people back from a famine would involve flooding the zone with people and medicine and medical supplies, and that require a kind of operating environment that are nowhere close to having right now. People trapped in northern Gaza are living through hell on earth. Now, this is why, sadly, it took this, or rather specifically some foreign aid workers being targeted, which, by the way, has already happened, a specific ones that are friends with Biden, apparently, to make them care and have to say something about this. But here's the updated title. I'll show you the older one on the 10th. Democratic congressional calls to halt arms sales to Israel pick up steam. Here's what it actually said before. 56 Congress members call on Biden to halt transfers to Israel until the World Central Kitchen, I forget what it actually said. It was something like, which is why it makes you so mad they change these titles and don't put any kind of update other than just like updated. You don't know what changed. That never used to be any journal. It's just like I need to explain it to you guys. There's no journalistic integrity in the corporate media anymore. Point being, I'm glad they suddenly feel they have to pretend to care. I mean that. I know they don't in most cases, but at least they feel like they have to pretend. That's good. But sort of hard not to read this as these 7 foreign aid workers were enough to cause this reaction, but 40,000 civilian deaths, 15,000 children were not. Shows exactly who they are in the best example of the word I've seen so far, opportunists. People that are willing to take any position to benefit themselves, even if they clearly don't mean it. Or rather, I think what it wrote it as, a person who exploits circumstances to gain immediate advantage rather than being guided by consistent principles or plans. Opportunists. Isn't that exactly what we're staring at? Arnaud Bertrand writes in regard to the food aid point, yet another proof, if need be, that Israel lied shamelessly. And this is hilarious. This is the point we were just saying, in fact. January 3rd, was he still the spokesman on the 3rd? I forget. But, the now fired and defunct Israeli spokesman, Ilan Levy, writes, Israel places 0 restrictions on water entering Gaza, calling a New York Times report so fake, I don't even understand where it's coming from. That's what he wrote. So fake, I don't even understand it. He's talking about 0 restrictions and highlights where they say Israel has also imposed a siege on Gaza for months, cutting off most of food, water, and fuel and medicine. Like, do we even need to play Gantz going food, medicine? Like, it's just obvious. But then he just comes out and goes, that's not true. And today, or rather on the 6th, when he wrote this is what the Times of Israel writes. U.S. says Israel approved reopening of 20 bakeries, which, by the way, I completely forgot to go into, damn it, water pipeline in northern Gaza. So, as he writes, today, Israel says we'll reopen the water pipeline. I mean, I shouldn't even, like, how dumb it is that he can come out and say, no restrictions, and then they go, okay, fine, we'll reopen that pipeline. How do you not obviously see that's a restriction? But we already know this. Now, by the way, the reason I just got mad if you don't know that is that I wanted to include, I forgot to grab it, the point, I'm not going to do it now, that remember when Elon Levy and Kogat were both, actually, I think I can grab just the one really quickly, because it's actually important, the Kogat point. There, right here. See, this is Elon. And we'll do this one. So here's Elon saying, and guess this is perfect for the timing. This is February 29th. What he's showing you is a video from long before that. Because if you look at the Kogat post, or rather specifically this one, Oren Barksey, who's sharing the same stupid video, but this one has a fake thing posted over it, what you'll find is they fact check it and go, oh, guess what? That is a video from a bakery that was bombed and destroyed completely on the 3rd of October. Yeah, it's that simple. And it's very easy to check. I mean, this is the Al Nusrat bakery and refugee camp, which is completely destroyed. The point is, he lied about this back in February 10th. He was citing it from Kogat, who did the same thing, which right there is your point to make very clear that Kogat is a lying group, that's a group that is about coordinating humanitarian aid, that is lying about aid for starving people. I mean, the worst of the worst of the worst. My point is, if you know he's lying and they fact check and said, nope, sorry, it's gone, so is Kogat, that's obvious. Then here is Elon Levy, almost 20 days later, going, did you know there's 20 operational bakeries, showing the same fake video that's destroyed, not happening. And no, there's not 20 operational bakeries on February 29th. They were mostly all destroyed at that point, and they have been even more since then. My point is, this brings us back to the interesting point here, where this is Times of Israel on April 7th saying, UN says Israel approved the reopening of 20 bakeries. So explain for me how they can approve the reopening of 20 bakeries on April 7th, 2024, and yet somehow Elon in February 29th is going, did you know there's already 20 operational bakeries? I mean, this is how bad they are at this, or they just don't care. They're just flooding the scene, maybe just to waste my time with this. I don't know. I frankly find it kind of important to highlight how clear it is, especially since Kogat right now, which is the point we're going to get to next, is a central role in trying to shift the dynamic. So go, no UNRWA, none of this. We're going to work with Kogat and our groups, even though that group's already been caught lying alongside Levy about shooting people going for food aid from the flour massacre, or lying about the food aid that your job is to give people. I find that crazy. I'll make sure I include these for you. I just think that's ridiculous. It's that simple to prove. Oh, actually, I'm glad I went back. Arnaud Bertrand goes on to say, as the saying goes, semantics is the last refuge of a scoundrel. And he goes, and this is what Elon responds to, which is hilarious because he's responding to this because clearly he knows it makes him look stupid. And he goes, correct. There are 0 restrictions on food of entry of food, water, medicine, or shelter. He goes, whatever gets sent to the crossings gets in. Directly supplying resources to enemy-held territory is quite another matter. Wait, what? So you're saying there's no restrictions, but enemy-held territory is different? So who in the hell is talking about you delivering food to Israel? I mean, that's a really pathetic response. That's why Arnaud makes fun of him. So you're pretending you're sending unfettered aid into Israel? Because we're not talking about enemy-held territory is what you're saying is Gaza. And the only thing we're talking about is whether there's unfettered access to Gaza. What he says here, and here's the best way to put this. This is the New York Times post. Israel has imposed a siege on Gaza. Okay, he responds by saying that's false. Easily fact-checked. Well, you're right, but you're wrong in saying it's false, but says they place 0 restrictions on water entering Gaza. Okay, then he responds to that by saying there's no restrictions on food and water. Whatever gets sent to the crossing gets in, but we're supplying resources. Like, actually, now that I read it again, I don't even know what he's trying to say, because the first part of that sentence contradicts the second. If whatever sent gets in, but then you say, but it's different when sent to territory. So all you're really saying is, but that's not true, because we're dealing with enemy-held territory, which is the only thing we were responding to, which is Gaza. I mean, guys, you very obviously see that this guy is drowning in lies and doesn't even know how to respond. It's embarrassing. Look at the ratio. You're a fool, Elon, and we all see it. And then I'll just go through it. Arnaud Bertrand continues to say, yeah, I'll read what he said there. He goes, there are 0 restrictions entry of water was meant to be qualified with, except when said it comes from Israel. It's just so stupid. Again, I guess that's kind of the way you could read that, right? So he's going, everybody else's, that is getting in, despite the fact that it's very clearly not, and everybody can prove it. But I guess with Israel, what we send is limited. God, what a pathetic game they're playing. But he goes on to say, also, North Gaza is enemy held. I thought you'd announced early January that you dismantled Hamas in Gaza. See, over and over and over. So is it a controlled area? Well, what's actually the case is I believe that it is. And I think what we're talking about is that road crossing down the center. Everything north of it is under their control now. They have, remember, we've got reports from Israelis where they're saying, Israeli officials, that they're actually going up to the Gazans that have remained there, the Palestinians, and saying, you have to renounce your right to return on video and give us any keys you have. That's really happening. Well, outwardly pretending like UNRWA's not even real. What are you talking about? There's no right of return. What is that? As they're going, you have to renounce it on record. So the point is they are, and then while also starving people down there, up there, whichever way you look at it. The point is that it's enemy held. That's why you can't deliver the aid there, which, by the way, the north is one of the hardest places, even once it comes into Gaza, that's being denied to the north. All it shows you is that any excuse matters. You can't verify any of it, so they'll just shift it tomorrow. Everything means nothing. Nothing means everything. Let me include those for you. Lying about the bakeries, as the Times of Israel points out that we have approved these new ones on the 7th of April. But here's Mohammed Shihada points out, Netanyahu scammed Biden again. And here's the actual article itself, so you can read it for yourself. It's translated from the browser. It's in Hebrew. First publication, Netanyahu's promise to Biden unfulfilled. What was that promise? We're going to immediately open all the crossings because, we're totally not restricting everything, and then didn't do that. In fact, didn't even give the order. As Ynet News writes, until now, the IDF, in coordination with the government's actions in the territories and the relevant parties at the port of Ashdod, have not received any instructions for implementation. And by the way, that's including the port as well. And they are waiting to find out if the directive is indeed coming. Meanwhile, while I read that sentence, 2 more children starved to death. But we're going to wait to find out what we're confused about here. The same directive that was written in the official announcement by Netanyahu's office, which came out immediately after the discussion last week, has yet to even be given. The order has not even happened. That was last week. Do you think they're concerned about starving children? Netanyahu adds 3 ministers to the decision-making team on the humanitarian issue. Coincidentally, these are the ministers who oppose the opening of the port and are not in the war cabinet. So the bottom line is we're being played again, or those that are pretending this is happening. This is a deliberate action, just like 2009 and all the ones before, to maintain a starvation tactic in hopes that you can probably finish the job and drive them into Egypt. And thank you, Muhammad, for always posting the links. I appreciate that. Now here is Elon Levy still pushing the food aid. And I want to make this point. It's not, we just went over the food aid in general. This point is about how I see this plan playing out. Just like many have argued, where they're shifting this to go, well, and again, it's just like the article we read before. They already tried to do this. But they said, no, it's the problem with the aid process. We'll take over. We created a new group, and now we're going to take control. How'd that work out? Here we are, same thing from then. The point is, it's about manufacturing the illusion that makes it look like it's not your fault for doing the thing that you're doing. And I have a little nod to Mallrats here, but the point is, I said at what he posted, UNRWA is systematically undercounting the aid trucks. We'll come back to that point. I simply said, this guy is still lying about the food. He is back on the escalator. It says, truly a special kind of evil to do this, not for your job, but seemingly just to see Palestinian children starve to death. Remember, he's not the spokesman anymore. I said, all you have to do is check the UN site, guys. It contradicts what he claims the site even says. Which, by the way, is hilarious to me that people down here are going, UN's not a good source. I'm like, maybe read what I wrote again. Maybe read what I wrote again before you freak. It's that people are so quick to assume. What I said was, even what he says the site contradicts that. So it's not even about whether they're accurate. It's he's going, the UN says this is what happened. And look at the site, and it's not what they're saying. I don't know why he thinks he can get away with that. Maybe he doesn't care. But if you haven't seen Mallrats, it's a hilarious clip. I don't explain it. But the point is, it's, Elon Levy just keeps coming back to the same thing. Now, here's what he said. This is yesterday. Let's talk about 500 trucks. He goes, here, and again, you know why he's saying that? In quotes, because it's the truth. Because the reality is on the UN site, and this is the most updated I could find. This one's on day 181, where I think at 189 now, I think, of ongoing genocide. The point's still the same. The day before October 7th, or the month, let's put it, or the week, the average working day. Okay, so it is the day. So the point is the day before, or the days and ongoing days before October 7th, or it just says the day in 2023, right before this, 500 truckloads. It's not just food, but 500 truckloads, all of aid per day. That was the average in 2023. So the whole year. So here he is going 500 trucks. That's why he's doing that, trying to downplay that proven, stated, constant reality, and says, here are the contents of 500 trucks worth of humanitarian aid sitting on the Gazan side of the Korean Shalom crossing, waiting for UN agencies to pick them up. Despite the fact that you've defunded them, but you've shot anyone that tries to work. Well, just ignore all of that and act like now they're supposed to just hop to and do the job that you've been shooting them for doing. But all that aside, because that's not even the point. He said the surge is real, which, by the way, is interesting because that seems to suggest that the other ones weren't. Oops. This guy is not that bright. But he goes, UN agencies are completely overwhelmed. Okay, let's just engage with this as if this was really happening. Because hear me on this. I don't know why we would just believe what they're saying. But and that's why we went to this first. They have not opened new crossings. So as I understand it, there's two at most, but I believe it's only the one that's truly operating. They're just turning everything back. So if you have only one crossing, you're conducting checks, which according to everybody, the truck drivers from every location, the UN groups, the human rights, everyone involved, journalists that are there talking to them, the process of the check is absurd. It's endless. And most cases it'll take days to go through the line, get to the check, which itself can take days. Then if you have one thing they disagree with, you get turned around, started all over. That's literally what everyone's telling us. Arbitrary things for like children's scissors, or in many cases, things they need, like gauze. Well, it's Hamas gauze. Turn it around. We can't have you patching gauze. That's what's happening. So then you take that and let's just say one day today, you just go, let's give them 500 like we used to. Right? What do you think is going to happen? In one, because it was multiple crossings. It was never just one crossing. So they dumped this in here, assuming it's even real. Then after, by the way, defunding the group who could barely operate, shooting the police and different people involved with actually delivering it, don't give them any kind of support, and then go, look at them fail. I mean, it's painful. It's painful that these people think we can't see through that. And again, I don't even know if this is real. That could be an old picture for all we know, or it could be a bunch of empty boxes. I don't know any of that. My point is that either way you spin this, it's provable that they're lying and that they're deliberately keeping the situation the way it is. Then here's what he says the same day, later that day. Daily food trucks entering Gaza. He says September, the whole month, before October, was 73. Well, no, he's lying because we just showed you that that's not true. That this is the up-to-date UN documented page where they're saying the average of the whole year was 500 truckloads. Now, there is ebbing and flowing. And quite frankly, any of the actual ebbing and flowing is due to what Israel is doing. We've already proven that. But either way, it amounts to 500 daily average every month of 2023. He's just lying. I looked through multiple UN pages for kind of overlapping on the same point. There's none of them that say there's only 73 that were delivered in September 2023. That's ridiculous. And in regard to daily. Then he goes on to show the 3 days after, which I think is very deliberate, which the current report stops, or pretty close to. Because this is, they're always behind by a week or so, right? Right now, it's up current as of April 4th. These lighter blues are the daily amounts, and then the dark blues are the weekly because it just it categorizes the week here. See? So that's the average, the weekly average. This is how many came through on these days. You can clearly see right now, right now, the most they got was of the whole time since October 7th was on March. And this is the UN, which doesn't even, this means not even just Israel, by the way, or overlapping with groups that have forced this through despite Israel, 226. Which, by the way, barely gets to a place where maybe they were meeting the amount they were already getting where they were still food insecure before October 7th. Because that's 500 trucks a day, most of which was food, but not all. So you're barely getting close. 200 to 300, I would argue, was the bare minimum. And even then, what was Israel saying? Minimum calories. We were going to give them the bare minimum necessary to survive. This was before October 7th. And they said the same thing after October 7th. There's no way around it. It's public and admitted crimes. And he's lying about it. My point is he weirdly goes into these next 3 days. Now, let's just even say those were real. It barely meets what was happening before, and they were still food insecure then. Right? And suddenly doing it all of a sudden for 3 days, even if maybe it's not even true. He's probably lying about that too, but I get the sense like they're trying to manufacture some kind of illusion by dumping all this in one location and not getting into the nuance of why that's not going to go through an area which isn't designed to take all of that at once. Either way, it's still not enough. The famine point doesn't just need the minimal bare calorie amount before. They need way more than that, plus medical treatment, plus IV drips and everything else it takes to bring somebody back from the brink of death. And here he is going, you're all terrorists because you don't care that we're doing that. Or rather that you don't, I mean, I screwed myself with that statement. I trapped myself with these words. End of the day, it's the same point I keep making. You're acting like what you're doing is sufficient, asking for praise, while I know he knows he's lying. And he goes, humanitarian aid is surging into Gaza. The UN needs to do a better job. Wait, so the UN that you're claiming is Gaza or is Hamas? I don't understand that, Elon. If you're telling us that they are Hamas and UNRWA is Hamas, why are you working with Hamas all of a sudden? It's just so stupid. Like, I wish I wouldn't even. These kind of things do not deserve our attention. It's that stupid. But somebody out there is believing this stuff. Now, here is Dutchy saying, attention, ICC, Elon Levy enabling the use of starvation as a weapon of war. Out of 500 trucks, only 130 managed to get through their restrictions to reach their destination. By conflating the numbers, he is attempting to minimize the gravity of the famine. So again, it's the point. He's just highlighting the illusion. You can dump these all here, but then you've manufactured restrictions that make sure it doesn't all go through. Then you point to the people that you've restricted in every possible way. Now, you should keep this link. This seems to update day by day. I think we're just a week behind. All the stats in here prove 4 or 5 other lies, by the way. Here's the water and sanitation, proving to you that they're just screwing them every which way. But this is the important part for today. They cut it off to 0 to start. Even if that was the only time it went right back to normal, still a war crime. Provable, undeniable war crime. He's the one going, we never restricted anything. Then tell me why it says 0 until the 19th of October. Then it says 11. Guys, that's a weekly number. The average per week from the 20th to 26th of October was 11 food trucks when they were getting hundreds and we're still in food insecure. Now, so you set up a situation where they're borderline already starving, then you trickle stuff in, and it's insulting, and it's meant to torture these people. And you can notice that never has it gone over, barely even 150 most of the time, until into April. Less than half of what they were even supposed to. It's just very provable and clear. Now, back to the point he said before. he highlights Kogat, who we already shown you is a provable liar about humanitarian aid. He says UNRWA is systematically undercounting the trucks. So you're playing it both ways, right? So not only are they just not getting it through because they can't do their job, now they're pretending they're bringing it through and just undercounting them. Well, where do we get that proof? Oh, Kogat. So you're pointing at yourself. I got it. Over 1,200 aid trucks entered in Gaza in 3 days. Seriously? So wait, so now you're telling us that they did enter? So why is he over here saying that they didn't? And saying that it's surging, they need to do a better job. Are you lying right there, Elon? Or are you just playing it both ways instead of speaking out of both sides of your mouth? You guys know it's the same thing they do. So if they need to do a better job distributing it, over here you're saying that they got it and did, they just lied about it. How embarrassing. Attempted to conceal their logistical failures. This is what they do. It's constant, isn't it? It's just both lies, both ways. Now, here is Mr. They have a list. And he says, we are employing new humanitarian aid directives in coordination with Kogat. And I think there highlights the ultimate ploy here. This is why Elon and Kogat have been doing this embarrassing game of high-fiving back and forth where they're using their own statements to circle this. It's just like the rape allegations, right? The new claim gets made, the old article points to the new one, the new one points to the old one, and they act like that's some kind of confirming their statements when they're all just citing the same unproven claim. That's what they're doing here. Elon points to Kogat, Kogat points to Elon, and they all go, it's all here, we can all prove it, and everyone else is lying. Well, guess what? I think this is about trying to shift in a group which they control, which is already dishonest about it, to try to continue the illusion into the next phase of this, just like they did before, and we already showed you. It says international organizations and CENTCOM involved with Kogat to solve the distribution problem that doesn't exist. The problem that you're creating to manufacture a fake solution that you already have ready. You know how that goes. Since the beginning of the war, 2,200 trucks containing, and there's the trap for you. There are the trap for him that he does. They keep setting the numbers. And I guess don't think that we know how to do math. I don't know. Because Elon's over here claiming numbers that literally don't add up with the number that we're being told. Because 2,200 trucks from October 7th to today ends up being about 118 a day, average. 118 every day, which is shockingly less than even before in every metric, no matter how you look at it. So here he is admitting exactly what Elon is lying about and what we ultimately know is maintaining starvation. And they just don't think you know that? Or are they too stupid to know what they're saying? I don't know. Here's Elon Levy again saying, yesterday, UNRWA only managed to distribute 20% of the aid. Okay, this is April 11th. This is today. Here he is on April 10th saying they're delivering it, but they need to do a better job. Or rather, they're unable to, and they need to do a better job. I want to make sure you don't miss that. In 24 hours, why wouldn't you delete the other one? It's just embarrassing. But he says that they've only managed to distribute 20%. Meanwhile, it accuses Israel of restricting aid. No, it doesn't. Literally everybody in the world other than you and the U.S. are doing that. Those facts are connected. And he highlights, guess what? Kogat. With facts and stats and source material? Nope, a screenshot from something that you can't check with anything else. That's supposed to prove something? Well, here is what Raphael points out. We referenced him before. He was the one making fun of you have a list. UNICEF convoy hit by gunfire. Well, guess what that article says? This is from USA Today. It says, and this was written today. So as he's telling you that everything's fine, it's only UNRWA lying about everything, the UNICEF convoy was hit again by gunfire. This is yesterday, as it tried to deliver aid to northern Gaza. Now, of course, right there you could say, well, who knows? Maybe Hamas shot at him, which certainly could be. But as you find out where they were sitting and who was involved and everything else we've talked about, it's very clear what's happening here. It says the latest in a series of violent obstructions faced by aid workers in the enclave. The incident has been raised with relevant Israeli authorities. So clearly they think they've been shot at by Israel because they continue to be, as Israel has admitted to. Sadly, humanitarians continue to face risks in delivering life-saving aid, that UNICEF said. Well, you remember, all they said was, Hamas was there. And apparently that's enough. But you're over here going, UNRWA, you're not doing a good enough job. And Elon says UNRWA is Hamas. So how does this work? If UNRWA was there doing the job you're claiming they're not doing, and you've already created the justification to shoot them anywhere you see them, Do I even need to explain that? That's pretty stupid. It's a manufacturing consent situation. But it says, or self-fulfilling prophecy. That's what I was trying to say before. But it goes on to say, the incident occurred 9 days after the World Central Kitchen aid convoy was attacked by Israeli rockets, killing 7 workers. And the same day, Israel promised to greatly increase the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, which right there clearly proves that they weren't doing enough if they have to increase it. But we don't talk about these facts, though. You know, the Israeli military did not immediately respond to the request for comment. Of course not. UNICEF spokesman told Al Jazeera she was in one of the vehicles at a holding point. Okay, guys, no way to misunderstand this. They're in a controlled holding area. There is no Hamas presence here. This is an Israeli military-controlled area that is surrounded by other military-controlled areas in these crossing points, and they're in this holding point, and she gets shot at. It says she said 3 rounds hit the car where she was sitting. The mission had been authorized, and the Israeli authorities knew about the convoy. There's no way to misunderstand this. After the shooting, Israeli authorities continued to delay the convoy, and it even eventually was forced to return to Rafah. So that contradicts the other claim. It says, so those life-saving supplies never made it to the children in northern Gaza. Okay, so here's the point about even if they let them into just Rafah, they're refusing it to go anywhere else in northern Gaza, which is where the famine truly is. So that's one point that Elon Levy and the rest are pretending isn't even part of the conversation. Look at it all in. They're not getting it to everyone. Well, you're stopping it from getting to everybody, provably. And this is even more interesting. It says Israeli commander pitches aid plan. This is what I was just talking about. We don't need an aid plan. Open all the crossings, let the aid in. Solved. But they're creating this to justify these next steps. It says Israel's Southern Command Chief met with representatives of UN agencies, Red Cross, IMC, USAID, fantastic, and the American Humanitarian Coordinator as part of, quote, increasing coordination and cooperation on the issue of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. We don't need any of that. Well, technically you do, just Israel needs to cooperate with the rest of the world. It says the meeting comes as Israel announced plans to greatly increase access to humanitarian aid for the residents. Again, you just can't, if you have to greatly increase it, it wasn't enough. Plans include a new border crossing designed make it easier to bring humanitarian supplies from overseas, from Jordan to the east. You don't need to recreate the wheel here. They're the reason it's not happening. It says these breakthroughs have a direct impact on the flow of aid. We plan to flood Gaza with aid. It will also streamline security checks and strengthen our work with internal. All you're doing is saying once we are in control, once COGAT or whatever cutout we create is actually the one dealing with this, well, then we'll act like everything's fine and suddenly it'll all look better because you won't restrict it anymore or whatever you actually do. You're the problem. You're the only thing stopping this from happening. And you're trying to push out UNRWA to remove the right of return documentation and their existence in general. So then, and that's seemingly the only goal in this one part of it. Then you're going to probably let this go right back to it because starving them, you don't need to starve them to death to be able to bomb them all to death, do you? This is a specific point. I think that's exactly what this is about. Now, lastly, or technically 2 last points. This is about the ceasefire deal. I'm going to try to do this quickly. Last points, hopefully 10, 15 minutes at most, because these are just passing things I want to include. Now, first, we've already talked about this ad nauseum, and it really does start to frustrate me. This is one of the things I was saying earlier, that we have to, we really do to a degree. Because as much as I know that I think most average people are seeing through this, at the highest levels of these conversations where decisions are being made, these conversations are held in some kind of fantasy land right now. And it's infuriating and people still die because of it. So Jerusalem Post on the 6th wrote again, Hamas rejected Israel's latest proposal, which is not even remotely the full picture. And as I wrote, over and over they push the same ploy. There is no new proposal. There is really not. Only Israel continuing to refuse a full hostage exchange and ceasefire in lieu of a partial hostage exchange and a temporary pause, which only the Israeli government wants, not even their people for the most part. And the U.S. dutifully plays along. Now, yes, they can alter certain aspects and be like, okay, here, how about we do 100 hostages and I'll give you, we'll give you back 200 instead from our, like that's not going to change anything when we're talking about a temporary pause which just like in 2009 meant nothing, when all they want is people to stop being murdered and starved to death. And I mean, like, in the sense of the world. Hamas seems like their main objective is about the exchange of hostages. But right now, it seems like they've recognized an obvious point of solidarity from the world, which, of course, nobody wants to see all these people die in front of them and starve to death. And only Israel is clearly making that happen. Bottom line, not good or bad guy or whatever however you want to arbitrarily pretend I mean this, like everybody else. You're pro this, you're anti that. I'm saying exactly what I mean. The bottom line is that this is an agreement between two parties. It's a negotiation. That's what it's supposed to be. One group and the rest of the world seems to say, we just want this to stop. We want the killing to stop. Not to say that you have to sign something that says you'll never go after Hamas. I don't know where that comes from. And the only thing Israel keeps pushing back on is that we will not allow this to stop for aid to reach people and for the killing to stop for civilians. Now, because they conflate that concept with the idea of, if we do that, Hamas wins. I mean, there's not even any data behind it. What do you mean Hamas wins? In what way? What do they gain other than temporary reprieve from your ongoing murder? I mean, think about it for a second. So all it ends up being is Israel continues to argue that they want a temporary something, and then they dance around with the numbers that everybody else disagrees with. And then they come back every time and say, Hamas refuses, even though they've said from week one they want a full exchange for a full exchange, complete ceasefire, aid brought to the people, and they've always maintained that. And now even the Israeli population has heard that, and they want that. They want it to be over because they want their families back. That does not mean they don't want to go after Hamas or all Palestinians. Those are two separate things. But they've just clearly recognized that the agenda that Israel says is aimed at getting them back is completely counterintuitive to actually getting them back. You're murdering them to get them home. It doesn't make any sense because Hannibal Directive, guys, it's obvious what's going on. But here's what Anthony Blinken says. And it's just so crazy. And this is another example of a position of power just wholeheartedly, knowingly lying to you about the situation.
We have an offer that's on the table now to Hamas that is very serious and should be accepted. Hamas could move forward with this immediately and get a ceasefire that would benefit people throughout Gaza, as well as, of course, get the hostages home. I think the fact that it continues to not say yes is a reflection of what it really thinks about the people of Gaza, which is not much at all.
See, it's just such a manipulation, right? So what you're trying to say is that because they don't accept a temporary pause, which all but guarantees the only thing that you want to stop, which is the only thing to protect them, which is the ongoing starvation and bombing. Everybody knows that. So, okay, so let's just say it's a 9-week pause or whatever the time is. It's a week, 10 weeks, whatever. The time is up. All of their leverage has been removed. They give back all the hostages. Israel rounds back up everybody they can in the controlled area they release these people in, goes back to bombing and murdering them. The starvation continues. Is anybody confused about how that doesn't make sense? Israel, and just so it's clear, Israel has said repeatedly that they're going to do that. They don't say starvation, but we're going to go back to our engagement with Hamas. Well, is anybody confused about what their engagement with Hamas looks like? Starvation campaigns and ethnic cleansing and bombing of civilians. Very clearly. So if you're arguing the only thing is for that to happen, then you don't care about civilians at all. You only care about specific parts of this, which are only Israeli connected asset. You don't even care about the American Palestinians or the Israeli Palestinians, which also exist, by the way. It's only about specifically the people that were taken from Israel that are there. And by the way, you're also killing at the same time. To say that means they don't care about their people is just a perverse projection. I'm not going to say I know what Hamas cares about because I'm not as stupid as Blinken to pretend I know what they think. But it's obvious to see that their actions are in the best interest of the people of Gaza. One, because they're defending the freedom of Gazan people. But on top of that what they're doing is fighting for a ceasefire that would at least give them the best chance to not starve to death and remove the killing, at least for the time period that Israel decides to. Everything else is only a guarantee that it will come back. Hamas surrendering guarantees it comes back. On and on and on. Like, do you think, I mean, let's not forget, what have I kept saying? Do you not see all the posts now where they completely conflate and use both of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas? They go, the Islamic Jihad just killed these people. They just got shot by them. Okay, so let's say Hamas surrenders today. Do you really pretend it's going to be over? Do you think they're going to go, but the Islamic Jihad that just killed our IDF members during our process with Gaza and Hamas is still there. And now they're in charge. Now we have to fight them too. You think Blinken doesn't know that? They all know that. That's why this makes me so disgusted that we're dealing with people that are very aware that everything they're saying is not only not going to help, it's going to guarantee the suffering. And then go praise me for it. I simply wrote, I can't even imagine how much you have to knowingly overlook to maintain your willfully ignorant stance. Oh, I said this to Michael Rappaport, actually. I said, I hope it's very uncomfortable. But I bet the money you get makes it sometimes momentarily less depressing. I hope not. Obviously, this guy bothers me. The point is, here's a breakdown of the fake 6-week pause discussion where it very clearly highlights exactly what we're talking about. Here's another representative of the U.S. government stepping in to say, I just returned from a trip to Qatar and Egypt. My number one focus, which is I stressed in my meetings, remains getting the hostages home, especially the Americans, including somebody he knows or a name he has. I said, well, I'm sure you just forgot to mention the other 600 Americans currently trapped and being bombed in Gaza. Or maybe you don't care about those Americans since they're not Israeli, you un-American absolute monster. The bottom line is, there's no way to misunderstand that. If you care about Americans, you care about Americans. If you care about human life, you care about human life. You only care about Israelis overlap Americans. That's it. In this dynamic, there's no way to misunderstand that. There's children dying and starving as we speak. I only stressed about the hostages. Okay. The Palestinian Americans are being bombed by IDF bombs, many of which, by the way, are not like there was the woman we highlighted that even The Guardian talked about, who is not a Palestinian born. She's an American who is also Palestinian, who is there, but is basically, bottom line was by virtue of bad luck, ended up in this position, was bombed and is in a hospital now, was only there visiting family. Sort of like Robert Inlakesh, for example, who lives in London, who has family there through extended family, who just might have gone to visit the day before this started, right? And the point is that doesn't make it any more or less important, but it just is interesting that even for the people that only care about specific colored people, you have an example there where it's an American who just went there and is now trapped. But weirdly, you only care about the Israelis who got taken there, even though the point is that the IDF shot at them every moment they could as they went back. These are Americans saying this, guys. Here's another one. Representative Alma Hernandez says, and every single thing of this is ridiculous. Like, these people are either this blindly ignorant about the facts or are lying for Israel. Israel agreed to release 900 Palestinian prisoners, she says, some of whom are violent terrorists, and a 6-week ceasefire. Alma, so you know these people? You know their history? Have you looked at the case files? No. She's just saying what Israel said, because that's what politicians do in the Zionist-controlled United States. The bottom line is the vast, vast, vast majority are administrative detentions. They're people that are not charged with anything in regard to, especially the younger generation here, and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty, and they've all written about this. Overall, they've got, before October 7th, there was, I think the number was like 6. As I understand it, it's past 10,000 at this point. And that's coming from conservative numbers of people that they've arrested long since. And even as the last pause, they released some of them, but they already arrested more right afterward. And even scooped up enough that the ones they released didn't even counteract what they arrested right before it started. Do you think she knows this? Does she not care? And a 6-week pause. That's all that means. So they give up the hostages. Israel dumps 900 people back into a controlled area. They wait for 6 weeks. Probably not, though. I'm willing to bet you even then they break it for many numerous reasons. And ongoing, continue to attack Gaza, West Bank, and everything else, which is still part of the conversation. Then what happens? Do you think everything just stops forever? They go back to killing them. Palestinians and everybody else included. There's no way around it. She goes on to say, yet all of you yelling for an immediate truce, which I don't hear anybody calling for a truce, which just shows you that she thinks ceasefire means truce because she's not very bright or she's lying for Israel, are not talking about the fact that Hamas rejected deal after deal, which is not true because you don't know what you're talking about. And the fact she says that they do not have 40 living hostages from the categories proposed. Aha, here's a new point we'll talk about. Now, please tell me how any politician can demand X, Y, and Z from a terrorist organization quite literally does not want peace. You're calling it a terrorist organization. Why would you somehow manage to argue that they want peace? Like you're shocked that ISIS isn't looking for peace? Like you guys have trapped yourself with this absurd. This is like saying everyone's anti-Semitic. Suddenly it doesn't have any meaning anymore. The fact that you call anybody you don't like a terrorist organization makes it kind of hard to make it like have some kind of nuanced debate about how the dynamic of the negotiation would go. If they're terrorists, by your definition, they don't care about any of that. Then you are outraged about how they're not seeking peace. Are they the government of Gaza or are they a terrorist organization that doesn't matter to anything? Like you guys play it both ways in every single thing you do. And I just mean anybody who's playing this way, whether it's Israeli, Jewish, is the United States, Christian, who cares? She says there is no negotiation with terrorists, except constantly doing that this whole time. Somebody clearly pushed her to do this. She doesn't even know what she's talking about. This is as dumb as John Fetterman. Welcome. Good job, Alma. You're as dumb as John Fetterman. To go through this whole statement saying that there's a negotiation taking place and then end with no negotiation with terrorists, you're stupid. Simple as that. That's a really dumb thing to say. And I could have gone a lot more nuance with that. It's just stupid. It's dumb. You made a statement that contradicts everything you just said. So is there no negotiation with terrorists or are you in the process of negotiating with a group that you're calling terrorists? I'll let you work that out. Here is AIPAC highlighting what she pointed to, saying unavailable for comment of all the people I guess they claim are fighting for Hamas or whatever they claim. Well, here's the interesting point and exactly what we told you would happen. I predicted this right in the beginning. It wasn't hard to see. CNN reports, and we should also point out that I've only seen this coming from corporate media. So for all we know, this could be a complete manufactured lie stemming from one of the controlled leaders that they gave billions of dollars to that they're keeping safe in Qatar. Who knows? But Hamas has indicated it is currently unable to identify and track down 40 Israeli hostages needed for the first phase of a ceasefire deal, which, by the way, they're not even agreeing to yet. So it makes me wonder whether any of this is fake or whether this is just a fake story coming from groups the CNN trusts to report what Hamas says. You know, like Israel, for example, that they would just go, oh, Hamas says, because Israel told them that. But my point is, I feel like this is going to come to pass even if this is a fake story. They're killing them, guys. The Israeli hostages who have returned have admitted that. Here's a post we covered at the time. Freed Israeli captives admitted they had more fear of IDF bombs than of Hamas. And they came back and said, I watched a family member die. Or really, I think I'm thinking of October 7th. Yes, that was the Port Yasmin. They said that they saw hostages die next to him. It's all off the top of my head, but you can read this and watch it for yourself. Mondeweiss, Gray Zone, and Electronic Intifada, everyone's covered this. They have come home and they're speaking to anybody on the record that they were trying to kill us, or at the very least, they didn't care. We have hostages shot in multiple examples, people gassed to death. I mean, the point is they've killed what appears to be more hostages than they've rescued. And I think clearly they've killed more people than I think Hamas is responsible for, based on what we've dealt with this entire time. That's going to outrage people, but I think the facts are building up to a point to where it's no way you can ignore it. Their own people are saying this. The helicopter pilots, the tank drivers, the hostages, the people from October 7th on that day, the security head of the kibbutz. I mean, for crying out loud, how much more evidence do we need? These are primary source material. So the point is when you're going, well, we don't have enough hostages. Well, didn't I say this where I'm saying there's going to come a point where Israel, and this is what I talk about with the Bibas family and other examples where we can prove. And I say that in the sense, I shouldn't say prove in the sense that it's possible, I guess, that he was coerced, but the father of the family on the record says that they were killed by IDF bombs. And yet Israel continues to use the red-headed children as a ploy. I still argue, and this is, I think, what Hamas said, that they tried to return those bodies back on that last pause. Israel ended it abruptly, I think, because they didn't want that family to be admitted to be dead. That was my personal opinion. In any case, I said at that time, what happens when they then say, we demand this many, and they don't follow through with that, and they say they broke the ceasefire, even though they've killed enough hostages, now they don't have that many anymore. What happens then? Well, Israel continues to say, you didn't do what you were supposed to, and that's why we have to continue. Even though they've systematically killed their own people to the point where they don't have enough anymore. Where this person says, where's the outrage to somebody posting that? Are you even asking whether it could be? I mean, here's the admin saying shouldn't have bombed them. The bombing in the area where they're held is killing them. There's been 4 or 5 Haaretz articles written about this, where they were there. They said we were in a donkey cart. They bombed. We almost got killed. I saw somebody die. We were at an apartment building. I mean, they're bombing everywhere in this area. They've admitted to being bombed so many times. They're scared of the bombings. They have permanent hearing damage everywhere. Here's Rick Scott. This is the kind of thing we get. This was another Florida senator, another person in a position of power, I think knowingly lying here, personally. Highlighting what the only thing, so all the stuff we're talking about, all the provable examples, and this is what we get from these people. He goes, I just returned from Israel, where I witnessed Hamas terrorism firsthand. Firsthand? He says, blood was left behind where Jewish families were brutally killed. Memorials of women who were raped and murdered and babies butchered. It's all fake. Right? Babies were not butchered, guys. That's the point we just made. Haaretz and other people involved in the Israeli leadership have made this clear. Some of them by accident. Only 2 babies were killed in that conversation. None of them were butchered. So he's just citing 40 beheaded babies, all the same lies, the rape allegations, everything that has been clearly shown to have been false. On top of that, blood was left behind. I said, so you're saying after 6 months, there's still blood not cleaned up? That seems like a lie, unless that's not what he meant. Imagine trying to redirect outrage to a small group of people who sadly died, and we should all be sad about it. Humans dying is sad. And on top of that, anything that they did that was a crime, such as provably taking a child back to Gaza, that's a crime. Nobody should be okay with that. Nobody should deny that. But I said, imagine trying to redirect outrage to a small group of people who sadly died on one day 6 months ago, many by the IDF, though, from 40,000 killed so far and children starving to death as I write this. Now, if I had said that and just not saying the second part, people would, and probably still will be, outraged that I said small group. But how do you not look at 40,000 civilians compared to what did the end up number being, 100 and something? Which is horrifyingly sad. I'm not trying to downplay civilians being killed. But even then we know that the number they're citing, most of which are IDF police and settlers. That was proven by the Cradle and plenty of others. And if you look at Israel's own collages, most of them are military IDF. And on top of that, we do know that most of them go through that anyway. But at the time, these were not reserves. These were people in the military. And that makes them legal military targets during an occupation and a armed resistance. And that's what, again, Ritter's talking about here, the Hannibal Directive and the fact that they did this. So all he has to say is that it's embarrassing. Here's another representative. This is a North Carolina U.S. Senator, Ted Budd, saying the truth is that Qatar does have the ability to expel Hamas terrorists. And here's where we finally see this coming into play. Weird how I keep pointing this out for 6 months, and some of us have, right? Many of us have. And how nobody's talked about it? Isn't that strange? Except remember, Netanyahu said he wouldn't do it, which makes no sense. It will, though. We'll show you again if you haven't seen it. He says the truth is that Qatar does have the ability to expel them from Doha if they don't release the hostages. He says, get this with a straight face, if they don't use their leverage, Qatar must face consequences. Bring them all home. Oh, I see. So it's okay to argue that they have to use their leverage to stop Hamas from holding people, which is what's happening. I mean, rockets, I guess, are sporadically, like we're told, landing in a field every so often, but nothing like the ongoing onslaught of what's going on in Gaza. So if they don't use their leverage to stop Hamas from holding people, which again, hostages, just like Israel has right now, thousands of them, that they need to use their leverage. And if they don't, they're a problem. And only about the hostages. Now, do you know where this is going? I hope you already connect the dot. Do you know how embarrassing it is for them to stand there and tell you that Qatar must use their leverage to stop them from holding people while you can't discuss that the U.S. government should use its leverage to stop the whole damn thing from happening? You know, the only leverage seems to matter, the fact that if you stopped arming and funding and supporting them, this would stop tomorrow. But no, we don't talk about that. Qatar must face consequences. Really? God, this is embarrassing. Do you think he even knows that? This guy's just reading what he was given. That's what I bet. That's sad. If the U.S. wanted to stop this, they could do it all right now. The hostages would come home. They would exchange it. There would be no death or no more death. I mean, in the sense of at least the time frame when that ceasefire was held. But no, doesn't matter. Let's only point in one direction. Let's only care about one type of person. Let's pretend like everybody else is responsible. And now we're also going to call out one of the groups working with the mediation to conversation. Just to try to break it all down even further, right? Do you really want there to be a deal, or now you're going after the group that won't? I mean, it's embarrassingly obvious. And here's Emily Schrader again going, tell me again how they care about the people of Gaza. 4 billion, 4 billion, 3 billion. You remember. It doesn't matter. These people are just gross to me. The way that they act, the way that they like smirk at the comments about people being murdered, you know, like it gives me the chills to watch these people act. It really does. And again, that's not, I mean, it definitely is my opinion, but let's be real about this. It's not some subjective thing. These people are in the act of killing people, even if you think it's justified. No one's pretending they're not killing people. They're even going, yeah, thousands have died, but that's just war. That's what she actually wrote. So if you're okay with that, I think you have to deal with that. That's something you have to kind of come to terms with. I'm not okay with them blithely dismissing thousands of children dying, no matter what the justification is. So that's why when they go on these interviews and like smugly act like you just don't know what you're talking about and smirk and smile and roll their eyes about children dying, it really sits with me. But the overall point is the same thing we make in the whole show. They know this. She knows why they have that money. She just banks on the fact that you don't.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told, is on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion. By doing it, we increased the power of Hamas. We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
Netanyahu maintains the Qatar money was to avoid a humanitarian.
What they're going to say is for humanitarian aid. The point they make every time. Why is anybody trying to argue that they would give them billions of dollars in cash in an area where they can't buy aid with it and say that's for aid? Right. So who are you going to give the cash to? So Israel goes, here, Hamas, here's cash, or through Qatar, whatever you look at it. And then Hamas goes, hey, Israel, I need aid. Here's cash. Why don't you just keep the cash and give them aid if that's what they needed? It's like, it's so childishly obvious. You don't bring in 500 trucks of aid and there's still food insecure if you can just go buy the aid in Gaza. Now, that doesn't mean there's no food production, but they have destroyed that since October 7th forward and have been for a long time, systematically. Even the Washington Post wrote about it. The bottom line over all of it is that she knows all of this. She knows these people are funded by their government. As I wrote to her, where do you think they got the money? Do we miss them delivering trucks? No. It was provided by the Israeli government to arm a group they called terrorists to stop a two-state solution. I hope it's uncomfortable that even a child can see through your lies. And I put here's even the Haaretz article. Mossad chief visited Doha, urged Qatar to continue Hamas financial aid, protection money, as the foreign prime minister calls it. That's why they're protected. I think they're now trying to destabilize this whole dynamic because they're trying to shift something again. Here's Abir pointing out, we just want the hostage back, okay, guys? Which is what they're trying to pretend. Oh, but also, by the way, here's our promotional video of Israeli settlers about resettling in Gaza and rebuilding the settlements, which were broadcasted on an online event hosted by Australian Jewish Association. Oh, and look, and it features all sorts of Jewish leaders and the one championing the settlement idea. Look, it says ICC Jerusalem. And then here are, there's Smotrich. There's Ben-Gvir, passionately talking about how we're going to take all of Gaza. We're going to resettle it. No more Israeli or no more Palestinians. It'll all be only a Jewish settlement. But we just want the hostages back, guys, and it'll all be over, right? Anybody? I mean, I don't understand how anybody honest doesn't know this. There's more than enough of us pointing this out. So that's why I come back to the point to where I think we're literally fighting with an army of bots and manipulators and blind Zionist supporters. And then everybody else is either ignoring it or calling it out. And then on top of that, don't forget, we've talked about the gas, one of the many different things. I don't think this is the primary. I really don't. But as we were telling you, and this is from April 5th, 12 gas exploration licenses have now been approved just since October 7th for Palestine's maritime areas. Not for Palestine, though, for other groups working through the Israeli government at their benefit at the expense of Palestine. Because freedom and not occupation, and that they have control of everything in their area, blah, 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 blah. Obviously. Lastly, we just talked about the Israeli attacks on the Iranian embassy in Syria and how completely belligerent that was, how none of the Western media even cared about it, which just shows you how bad a situation we're really in right now. So on that note, I definitely sense something bad coming. Here's Tom Cotton again. This guy is a dangerous actor, in my opinion. Israel is under threat of imminent attack by Iran. Well, if that's even true, which I do believe that Israel, I already went through this for the most part. Iran said very clearly they're going to respond strategically at their own when they decide to, which is exactly what happened last time. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if they attacked Israel. I mean, they bombed legally Iran by bombing that embassy. They did that on purpose. But my point was, I wrote this earlier today. I completely get. I would, if they did, I wouldn't surprise me. But I think Iran and their leadership, their rulership is very clearly smart enough to see that they're trying to be goaded. That's why they don't respond in Syria and elsewhere. The point, unless they're directly bombed, is that they're going to respond at a point, I think, that will be strategic, like before, in a way that's not perceived, and that Israel can't use to seem like they raised the stakes. Israel did it strategically in the Syrian consulate, or Iranian consulate in Syria, because they wanted them to feel like they attacked them. They want their people to feel like they attacked them directly. But then when they respond in a direct way, they can say Iran is the one that attacked, which again is exactly what's happening. So what do you think would happen if Iran bombed an Israeli embassy? Israel and the United States would have bombed 3 countries by now. You know that. What would they be claiming? Self-defense. Okay, so if they were to respond right now and bomb Israel, wouldn't that be self-defense under their explanation? Yes, it would. But it's not what that means. They're not that stupid. The Bethlehem Doctrine, which is what that's used for, it's called preemptive self-defense, which is an oxymoron. It's ignorant, is to claim that we think that's going to happen, therefore we can act first and call it defense. It's a real policy that the UK, the United States, and Israel all adopted. Goes on to say President Biden needs to warn the Ayatollahs immediately of this completely unprovable fake thing that hasn't happened yet, that the United States will back Israel to the hilt. Everybody knows that. There's not a child in the world that is unaware that the United States government will blindly follow Israel to any war that it starts. He says, reminding them that the attack will be swift and devastating. Well, that's exactly my point. You guys would not blink before you emotionally respond in a belligerently violent way as if that means you're powerful. No, that means you're weak. You've got power, but you're very, very weak. And that's what weakness looks like. You don't know how to respond. That's the whole hammer and nail point. This is every historical regime that is on the way down is acting just like this. And the bottom line, you're trying to cause this. They're trying to manufacture the situation, and Tom Cotton is playing his role. Even though we know that they've already been bombed first, but you're going to say that this is a threat that's coming their way. And I simply said, I don't know about you guys, but I feel a false flag coming on. Hashtag false flag watch. Just keep an eye out. Tag this underneath it if you see something. I definitely think we're about to sense something that like Israel will manufacture an attack inwardly to justify what Iran, to say Iran did it. Or again, it could very well be Iran attacking. So it's an interesting time for this to play out. But something tells me I do not think Iran is stupid enough to play right into their hands. That's very clearly what they want. So just be on guard. Prove everything. And as Doom points out, Remember when he said that Iran, don't believe anything my government says like 3 days ago? He goes, well, here it is. U.S. believes Iran and proxies preparing missile and drone strikes inside the government targets in Israel. I mean, come on. Certainly could be. But just like every other time in the past, Iran does not just go right to exactly what the U.S. said they're probably going to do, right in the place they said they're going to do it at the time they said they would. That's stupid. Certainly could be, though. But it seems pretty dumb to think they're just going to fall right into the trap. And the proxies are not proxies. These are groups that Iran supports, just like the U.S. supports all sorts of people. To say that the PMU or the Houthis or the Ansarallah movement, or rather the Ansarallah movement or Hamas or any of these groups are Iran proxies is a lie that we've proven 45 times over that they desperately need you to believe because they're trying to aim at Iran. Israel is using the U.S. government as a battering ram against Iran and has been trying to do it for decades. In fact, they already did use them during Operation Ajax. They're just trying to do it again. So these proxies preparing missile and drone strikes, well, how about this? It could be a blatant lie. We wouldn't know any better. But it could be the PMU getting ready to respond because guess what? The U.S. just bombed them. And it has nothing to do with Iran from their perspective. From the U.S.'s perspective, they use them as a battering ram, or not a battering ram, more so a target practice to make the world think we responded to Iran. No, you just bombed a part of the Iraqi government in which you occupy, that you also have armed in the past, which then ended up in the hands of the PMU. So you're literally fighting with a group armed with your weapons, claiming it's Iran, when that's not what's happening. So if this is, by the way, already what's happened before, which partly I think that's part of the plan. The PMU has already responded in the past to things the U.S. did, and the U.S. pretended Iran responded to them. Mark my words, guys, this is being manufactured. Now, Marco Rubio, classic manipulator, steps into this very conversation. He says, Israel is facing a threat of imminent attack. Yeah, probably because you bombed Iran. You guys are just cowardly and you can't admit the fact that you started this like everything else directly from Iran and in combination with coordinated attacks. Every one of them saying the same thing. Hezbollah, Houthis, Iranian proxies, Syria, and Iraq. You mean the countries that you're illegally occupying, which means each of them have the right to arm rebellion legally? It's just like they're so desperate to hide this stuff, but they're falling right into it. Biden must stop the harsh criticism, he says, of the only pro-American democracy. Hate to break it to you, bud, but it's not pro-American and it's not a democracy. But who cares about the facts, right? Israel is a very clearly only pro-Zionist fascist state. That's what it is. At the expense of the Jewish population and literally everybody else. And they'll state it publicly if you just pay attention. And it says, and make clear the U.S. will support them in defending against and responding to any such attacks. Already starting it up. So then once they could just flip something off somewhere and say, they did that, we have to respond. And nobody would even question it. Well, there's also this scary part of it. This is from April 7th. Didn't see this coming. I mean, it's something we've talked about. In fact, Vanessa Beeley and I had a great conversation about this back in 2020. Evidence points to EMP in what mainstream media, DHS, call the new 9/11-like threat. That's what Whitney and I've talked about before, right? But bring forward, it's very rarely these things happen in such quick succession, right? So she was reading this early, and it could very well be that right today is when this plays out. Either way, Israel, it says, could debut deadly EMP bombs that destroy electricity if Iran launches attack. Think about that. This is the Express, not a highly reputable platform, but definitely mainstream media. All they're saying is Israel could use the thing we know they've got that they don't really admit to if Iran launches an attack. Or Israel uses this and just goes, we're responding to Iran. Or we saw them about to attack. Bethlehem doctrine. So we use this and everyone's going to go, Iran did it. We already know this, guys. It's happened 45 times since I've been doing this in my life. And EMP, isn't that what a lot of us are worried about with even like the overlap to the Great Reset conversation? I mean, what if they blame it all on Iran and say Iran did it? Wouldn't be any different than what they're doing in Gaza right now. These are all hypotheticals, but we have to realize this is being built by everybody but Iran. Now here is an article. Top U.S. general visits Israel amid increasing tensions with Iran. Oh, except, wait a minute. That's actually from, oops, I did it backwards. Same thing. I just did it backwards. Top U.S. general meets Israeli brass amid Iran tensions. Oh, wait, that's 2019. Oh, strange. I thought this was brand new. Oh, here's the other one. Oh, wait, that's 2023. Top U.S. general visits amid Iran tensions. My joke that I stumbled there was my point is, oh, excuse me, this is the one from today, as if it's some new hype about some new building problem that they talk about every day for the last 30 years. It's just so, if you follow this stuff, there's nothing new under the sun, guys. They're live in the same ways about the same people all the time. It says U.S. CENTCOM chief arrives in Israel amid fears of Iran strike. My point is they're hyping this all over the internet today from people like Cotton about how it's indicative of the fact that it's coming. We see it, Iran's about to strike. No, they do this when they want you to think that, right? They go, hey, send the chief over there so we can go, oh, it's building. Iran is about to do the thing that they, it's based on what? The fact that Milley went over there, or the fact that now this guy goes over there? Whatever his name is, Michael Kurilla or Kurilla. Here's Mike Pompeo. Don't miss the fact, by the way, that all of the swamp creatures have all come drifted out. Bolton and Pompeo, and they've all started getting real vocal about why. April 9th, he comes out and says, what do Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis have in common? All are supported by Iran. Until President Biden confronts the root cause of turmoil, we won't have peace and security. Well, here's what I wrote. What do ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Israel all have in common? You see where this is going. All are supported by the U.S. government and Mike Pompeo. Until Americans confront the root cause of the turmoil, we will not have peace and stability. I mean, it's just so funny how they just keep, like, what I said is a provable fact. They 100%, whether you know that or not, or whether you accept that or not, the receipts are provable from deep dive documentaries from Dr. James Corbett. They point to State Department documents. They point to literal receipts, to overlaps, or the Ben Swann documentary that highlights the actual creation of ISIS in the same way. There's no denying this. Al-Qaeda was an earlier part of the same thing. Israel, part behind all of it with the United States. So the point is, they are all the same, and they all support each other. And that is what's maintaining this, not the resistance movements of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Ansarallah. Those are groups that have arisen in response to their belligerent foreign policy, fighting for their occupation and independence against, shockingly, the very thing that the U.S. government pretends it's always fighting for. No, that's what the original revolution was fighting for. I think very early in our history, that got taken back by any number of other controlling parties. I don't think we live in the place we think we do today. I think this point here is the overarching reality that we just need to recognize, and I don't want this to be taken as good guy, bad guy. As I've always said, whatever movement we're talking about, whatever government, and I could be just that jaded, but I think history is kind of clear. Any group like this allowed to have the kind of centralized power that the world has allowed these certain powers to have will all end up like this. That's why it behooves the average person to continue to see this, understand it, and make sure it doesn't happen now or again. Whatever person you vote in, whatever situation you think makes everything better. People like Pompeo and Bolton will always be there trying to lie in your ear to get power, to use you for their benefit forever, because that's who these kind of sociopaths truly are. We need to be the people standing in the way of that. The humans of the world, and I mean that just the sense of humanity, the people with morals, the people that actually care about human life and the things that they're stepping on while acting like they're saving them. Look at us liberate Libya as you destroy the country, right? That's him. That's what these people are. We need to stop that. And when I say that these support all these, and that's how the reality is, everything they're doing is manufacturing the justification for them to maintain power at the expense of everything that they pretend they're actually fighting for. It just couldn't be more clear. And that in no way is meant to mean that we're doomed, right? No, we're not going to be. We in fact are proving right now that we do have power. I think the sad reality is that people are, look, I've seen it more than ever. Like, as people, just like with COVID to a degree, as people shift out of it, the partisan game gets so aggressive. Like right now, it's overwhelming. I don't want to go into the people's names and everything else. You guys know exactly what I think. It's very clear that it's this over the top push right now, dividing. I even saw some of them start to step into this conversation for the first time in 6 months. What do you know? And I have a pretty unpopular opinion about it. I think most people are like, great job. It was so great. And I disagree. I feel like overall the information, there's some points just like always that are good. But at the end of the day, you're ultimately solidifying the key points behind it all that maintain the problem. and, waited 6 months to go, hey, I care about genocide. I don't really take that seriously. In any case, be careful. There's a lot of people out there that are the mainstream alternative media that are desperately trying to grab this, just like with COVID-19. All of a sudden, Brett Weinstein of the world are these leading people. What are you talking about? There are so many people that were, the same point they make every time. That's what I feel like this ends up being. And I'm okay with that because I know that we don't exist in an honest situation here, that we're out here hacking down the story. And it's not just me. There's plenty of other people, and all of them. All the people that it's not just the people we overlap with, but I try to overlap with the people that I respect. But there's plenty of them that I've never worked with that are doing great work out there. My point is that we're out there hacking down these stories, chopping down the foliage, getting through to the important parts of this. Going, look at this new part of it, hacking these things down, and you get the larger ones that kind of swing in behind you and go, look at this story. And it's not about credit as much as people always try to make it about that. Obviously, as always, I always say we all want credit for our work. To argue that you shouldn't want credit for your work is just a way to pretend like you shouldn't be mad that they stole your work, right? But that's not what it's about. It's about the way that these people swing in, give you a fraction of the story, and then cement you back in the two-party illusion with no source material to back up what you're saying. If you can't recognize why that's a problem, I don't think you want to. We have to see that this is exactly what they're doing from every possible angle. And right now they're desperate, coming up to election and everything else, to get you to stop paying attention to how clearly these partisan players have been absent, both in the build-up to the COVID conversation and the build-up to what's happening now. They always find a way to swing in at the last second to act like they care, just like the U.S. government. It's funny how that works. Thank you for tuning in and continuing to support what we do and fighting for the truth at all costs, guys, because there are people that need us today. There's always people that need us, that need people like us to fight for the truth. But more than ever that I see right now, there's a special important time that people are calling to the world. Anybody out there that cares about the things we're fighting for, now is the time to stand up, to call out the uncomfortable truths, to fight for what we need to fight for. And, and forego your chosen partisan sides when you start to recognize that they're holding you back from expressing your full opinion. There's a whole majority, in fact, out here that are okay with you expressing your opinions, even if it contradicts what I may think. Intelligent people. So fight for that, reach out to that, and try to bridge these gaps, even with people that you may think see things differently. In fact, fight for that. Engage with people that have different opinions, that are willing to have a conversation about it, and recognize that you have more in common with somebody who may disagree with you on a political point, that's willing to understand your differences, than you do with somebody who blindly supports you in that point, but will attack you for anything you say that goes astray of what they've decided. That is just the most obvious thing in the world. That's what we're fighting for. Thank you for joining us today. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.